Good morning. This is the public hearing of July 25th, 2017. Chair Srinivasan.
Here.
Commissioner Bland. Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chen. Commissioner Devonshire.
He's here.
Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Shamir Barron. Commissioner Voss.
Here.
Okay, Commissioners, the first item on the agenda today is an application for Certificate of Appropriateness of Borough of Manhattan, docket number 1912589. This is 143 Spring Street, located within the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. It's a federal-style dwelling built in 1818 with later alterations, and a metal and glass addition built in 2009. The application is to install a barrier-free access ramp.
Good morning, Commissioners. Meredith Leap, Preservation Staff. The application is to install a barrier-free access ramp at 143 Spring Street, which is located on the northwest corner of the intersection of Spring and Worcester Streets in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. The ramp is proposed at the Worcester Street entrance, which is on the addition approved by the LPC in 2009. The architect is here to explain the details of the proposal.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Barnholt. I am with John Peachy Architects, Senior Project Manager on the job. As was noted, we are here today to present an access-free barrier ramp on the Worcester Street side of 143 Spring Street. On the slide, we have our 1940s tax photo. The building was built in 1818, federal-style building. The architect is unknown. The next two pictures are from approximately 1970, when it was a restaurant on the ground floor. Okay, so we have our 1980s tax photo on the upper left, and then existing photos of the building today. So you can see the corner portion of the building is the historic portion that has remained, the federal style design of the building, and then the rear of the building is the modern portion of the building, glass and steel, that was built in 2009. The bottom right is the Worcester Street facade, which is the facade that we are proposing our ramp on. Some close-ups of the existing entrance on Worcester and the existing entrance on the corner there. As you see, there's steps at both entrances. The step at the corner side is 7 3/4 above the sidewalk, and on the Worcester Street side is about 1 1/4 inches. So here's an existing floor plan of the first floor. As you can see on the interior of the first floor, we also have a level change. So we have to work with getting somebody in the building and getting them from the higher level to the lower level once you're in the first floor. So our proposal today was to put an exterior ramp on the Worcester Street side, since that was the modern portion of the building, and we would not be affecting any of the historic portion of the building. And then to get to the front of the building, which is the lower portion of the first floor on the historic side, we would do an interior ramp. So we have the existing elevation on the top, proposed elevation on the bottom. We are proposing a very simple, or trying to propose a very simple ramp, diamond plate and steel handrails. The diamond plate will match the existing diamond plate that's already at the entrance of the building. So here you can see the section. You already have the existing steps and an existing platform at the entry level. So we are just going to add on to that with the extra diamond plate. And then just slight modifications at the platform that's already there in front of the door to create a seamless transition at the landing. Existing picture on the left and then proposed rendering on the right. So we really just wanted to create a very simple, minimal ramp handrail situation to blend it into the existing portion of the building. So part of our presentation, we did walk through the Soho Cast Iron District, and we found in the surrounding neighborhood, we found about 8 existing ramps already there, 2 on Worcester Street, just right down the block. So here are a couple examples from the neighborhood. Just some existing interior conditions. The top row is our transition between the levels at the first floor, and just showing some conditions at the cellar. Because we did look into lowering the floor at the Wooster Street side, but lowering the floor would create an unusable space in the cellar. The ceiling height is already pretty low at just a little over 7 feet, and then lots of pipes are running across the ceiling. And then another option, if we lowered a portion and put an interior ramp, then we would have to do also another ramp going to the other section, so the entire store would basically be ramps and landings. Just some sections to show the heights between the two levels and the cellar plan. And that is all.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, is the, I can't tell from the rendering whether is the rail black or is it
So
stainless? What is it?
Right now we have it proposed as stainless to match the storefront itself. And then the diamond plate would match the black diamond plate that's on the stairs.
Okay.
Let's see, get a close up of that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Are there any speakers on this item? No speakers. Community Board 2 recommends denial of the application in that there are alternative reasonable layouts inside the building to achieve ADA entrance requirement without occupying public sidewalk space. Okay. So do we have any other questions for the applicant? Okay, in that case, we can close the hearing. Well, I think this is very reasonable. The proposed ramp it's a good thing. It's on Wooster and associated with the modern modern part of the building, so that's good. And I think that its material and railings are all very simple and similar to other things that we have found appropriate in the district. Are there any concerns? All right, John?
In the matter of docket number 19-12589, 143 Spring Street in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. The application is to install a barrier-free access ramp. I note that the style, scale, materials, and details of the building are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. I recommend approval, noting that the proposed ramp will provide barrier-free access without eliminating any significant historic fabric, that the simple design and dark finished metal material of the proposed ramp and stainless steel finish of the handrail will harmonize with the materials of the modern addition, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the building or the Soho Cast Iron Historic District.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This application is approved.
Commissioners, the second item on the agenda is an application for a certificate of appropriateness of the Borough of Manhattan, docket number 19-6159. This is 6 West 95th Street, located within the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District. This is a Renaissance Revival style row house with Chagurigesque style elements designed by Horace Edgar Hartwell and built in 1893 to 94. The application is to construct a rear yard addition, install windows and rooftop HVAC units. We're just going to need a moment to get the proper presentation up.
Morning, Commissioners. Meredith Leak with Preservation Staff. The application is for 6 West 95th Street, located on the south side of West 95th Street between Central Park West and Columbus Avenue. The application is to install clear glass transoms at the front facade, which cannot be approved at staff level because the building historically had stained glass transoms. The application also includes the demolition and construction of a rear yard addition, which is visible from public thoroughfares. The installation of HVAC units is being handled at staff level. The architect is here to explain the details of the proposal.
And we just need just a moment to put up the proper presentation, but you have the handout, which is accurate, and it's coming very quickly.
Morning. Thank you for your time.
My name is Suchitra Reddy from Ready Made Architecture and Design, and we're here to show you our proposal for 6 West 95th Street, which is a row house that is part of a block of row houses designated in 1990. Our proposed addition, while our file is coming up, if you could refer to page 2, page 25, you will see the block map. And it shows you the plans of the neighboring, of the string of row houses. This block was built between 1891 and 1902. The 6 West 95th was built between 1893 and 94. And it is not a pristine block. There have been many modifications made to the row houses in this block. And you will see those on page 3. You can see that there has been so here you can see the block map that shows you all of the different configurations of the rear yards. These are the additions to the houses that we have been able to find information on for you on the block map. So you can see that there's a large degree of variation within the work that was done to the additions and modifications within the block. This is the north side collage that shows you the block facades. And here we are at the front elevation of the building. You can see the historic photo from the designation and the 1940s tax photo on the right. Our proposal for the front facade is to maintain it, preserve it as it is. The 2 transoms that we are proposing are above the windows in the front. If we go to the next page, you will see our existing front elevation and our proposed elevation. The first floor windows, there isn't enough information in the 1940s tax photo on the stained glass that was originally there. And there's not enough information on the block either to reconstruct it. So our proposal is to maintain the clear transoms that exist. You can see the same on the windows at the 3rd floor. The brick mold is being preserved and replicated, and we are also replicating the window paint color and matching the material function, and essentially they're being replaced in kind. On the rear elevation, you will see that we're proposing an addition that is being necessitated because there is substantial subsiding on the foundation of that rear brick wall. We have about 7, the brick is peeling off from the building. There's about 7 inches of variation from top to bottom. So we're going to have to take the brick off the wall to replace it. It's not safe. And we're requesting that when we do that, because it isn't really possible to do it safely, to rebuild the addition and modify the foundation, to take the entire addition down, and you will see, actually I'm going to skip one. So you can see that what we're asking actually is that we remove the existing addition, we create the new addition that steps back a little bit, that goes across the entire facade. And this will actually also give it a better ratio in terms of lot coverage, and maintain the same language. Currently, both of the rear facades of the 2 neighboring row houses are white brick. They all have Thursil on them. It's white painted brick, and they both have Thursil on them, which if we take off, again, causes damage to the brick. So what we are proposing is to put back white painted brick facade so that it matches. The only reason that this is actually visible from anywhere is that 2 row houses on 94th to 95th Street were annexed to 350 Central Park West and used as a service entrance, which creates a view into the rear yards of this space. And we end up seeing a small sliver of this from 94th Street. And this is a section just to show you that we are also having to excavate in the cellar and underpin the foundation of the neighboring building, which is very shallow and cannot support the work that's being done next to it. These are existing and images of the rear facade. That's the existing rear elevation, as I was mentioning, and our proposed rear elevation that steps it back and moves it across the entire building. This is our existing side elevation and the proposed side elevation. And the existing front view with the key plan. As you can see, there is a view through this narrow alleyway that's made by the service entrance to the building on Central Park West, through which we see a little bit of the rear facade. So you can see the existing rear view on your right, on your left, sorry, and you can see a close-up of that, and that's the existing, and this is what we are proposing on the right-hand side. We're proposing to keep, obviously, the corbelling, the denticated cornice, and keep all of the details that are as these rocks and everything small. This is again the existing front view from 95th Street, where you can see again a small sliver of the addition and the proposed front view. These are the windows that we're proposing to use on the rear. They're metal windows by Skyline. And there's a finish that we are proposing that would match the painted brick that's existing as closely as possible. This is our proposed plan. So again, here you will see the build out and you will see us pushing it around. And the proposed plan for the basement. I should note that we are retaining as much of the existing wall as we can. There are two portions of it that we can keep, that we are keeping on the interior.
Okay. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Oh, and the HVAC, that's being done at staff level. Okay. We have one speaker, Anna Sifter.
Good morning, Commissioners. Anna Sifter for Landmark West. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee appreciates the applicant's restraint in providing alterations to the facade and agrees that the door and window modifications are in keeping with the landmark's character. Additionally, the rooftop mechanical equipment is utilitarian and sensibly sited. While our committee typically advocates for the retention of the dogleg, this reduced wide-width replacement is framed in masonry and could feel plausible. We agree with the removal of grills at the upper rear floor and the overall massing. Whenever possible, we would prefer to see the removal of paint on historic materials and underscore that removing the fourth floor's painted covering would ultimately require less maintenance than continually painting the 3 new lower levels on the rear. Further, if possible, the wing wall at the exposed dogleg wall for number 8 West 95th Street would be more fitting in brick rather than ephes. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee supports this application. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? All right. Community Board 7 also recommends approval of this project. Do we have any additional questions for the applicant? Okay, we can close the hearing. All right, comments? Yes.
For staff, do we have a policy on thorough seal? Like advising applicants regarding thorough seal or other paints or what to do with it?
I'm sorry, on thorough seal?
Yeah.
Well, we are concerned about breathable coatings and would ask that they not use something that
Okay.
would prevent wicking.
That's good.
Okay, so you'll be working with, would be working with them on the paint material, is that right? Okay. All right. Any other comments? I think it seems very reasonable. Yes, John, please go ahead.
Just to highlight the fact that this is that rare occasion when it appears that they've actually reduced the footprint of the extension in the rear from the L to this footprint. I think they actually, although they increased, actually I think they probably lost a little bit of space, which is amazing. And they preserved the top floor. It's fantastic.
Right, and it's, but by doing that, they've got much more usable space, and they've also addressed the issue of whatever failure was happening in the L, so they can reconstruct that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I park on this block all the time, especially on Wednesdays when there's no alternate side. I'm sure the neighbors don't appreciate it, but it's a remarkable twin, this pair. It's a really beautiful, quirky pair of buildings, and I think that for that reason, it gave me a little bit of pause about the tail, but I think that it's well within what we normally do, and I think that if it were to become a template for its twin eventually, that would be a fine thing, and the block is varied enough that it would not seem to be inappropriate from that point of view. It's a charming house, and I think it's fine.
Okay. Dana?
Oh, okay. In the matter of a certificate of appropriateness, Borough of Manhattan, LPC 196159, 6 West 95th Street, Upper West Side, Central Park West Historic District. Application is to construct a rear yard addition, install windows, and rooftop HVAC units. I note that the style, scale, materials, and details of the building are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District. I recommend approval, excuse me, finding that the proposed work will not damage or destroy any significant architectural features of the building, that the historic stained glass windows were not present at the time of designation of the historic district, and the proposed wood windows will otherwise match the historic windows in terms of materials, profiles, details, and finish, and will be in keeping with the existing windows in this pair and in similar buildings in the street and district, that the rear addition will not rise to the full height of the building or project farther into the rear yard than other rear yard additions within this block. Therefore, it will not overwhelm the building or adjacent buildings or diminish the central green space, that the brick material palette and horizontal bands of masonry and metal will be consistent with the materials palette and residential scale of houses of this size within this block, that the proposed rear yard addition will only be minimally visible from limited vantage points from public thoroughfares and seen in the context of taller buildings, and that the work which the applicant will work with the staff on the details of will not detract from the special architecture of the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? This application's approved.
Commissioners, the third item is an application for a certificate of appropriateness, the Borough of Manhattan, docket number 173690. This is 126 East 73rd Street, located within the Upper East Side Historic District. It's an Italianate-style row house built in 1873 and altered in the Neo-Elizabethan style by Benjamin H. Weber in 1912. The application is to legalize the installation of an areaway gate and fence without Landmarks Preservation Commission permits.
Good morning, Commissioners. Katie Rice, Landmark staff. 126 East 73rd Street is located between Lexington Avenue and Park Avenue in the Upper East Side Historic District. The proposal is to legalize the installation of an areaway gate and fence installed without permits. The property did not have an areaway fence at the time of designation. The fence, as installed, aligns with the neighboring stoop. The applicant has provided examples of fences found on this block and provided a block plan outlining locations with areaway fencing. The applicant is here to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Okay, there are no questions. We have a few speakers. Elizabeth Fagan.
Good morning, Elizabeth Fagan, Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Although this fence was installed over 10 years ago, Friends does not condone illegal work on landmark buildings. This block has a number of large fences and areaways, and this fence encroaches onto a sidewalk that has already been compromised. While the fence height does not detract from the building, to us the design has a flimsy appearance. This enclosure should have been reviewed by the Commission in order to assess its appropriateness and perhaps find a better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Patrick Waldo.
Good morning, Commissioners. Patrick Waldo, Historic Districts Council. On a building in a historic district such as this, a railing with no curb is awkward and out of place. As demonstrated by the applicant in their own presentation, a typical setting for a railing is a curb. Our committee would like to see such a curb installed so that the fence meets the ground plane properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? All right, there are no other speakers. Community Board 8 recommends approval of this application as presented. Do we have any additional questions for the applicant? Questions? Okay, we can close the hearing. All right, comments? Yes, Kim.
I agree with the other comment from the public that we need the curb. Usually there's a bulkhead or a curb to differentiate it between the sidewalk and where the fence starts, and just that whole areaway usually has a curb or something there. Even if it's just a minimal, 3 inches or something, there's usually a curb there.
All right, yes.
I agree with Kim. When you look at the example they use for the traditional ring and picket fence design, it's actually a relatively hefty fence. And this, as constructed, this thing is really a weak, very, very weak statement. And I think rather than having to replace the fence, I think the addition of a curb would be what's appropriate.
Other comments? Yes, Dan.
I just think that the curb should be, fairly minimal. It doesn't need to be a heavy, curb. Because I think the fact this is relatively unintrusive as it is, the fencing, so.
Other comments? Any other comments? All right, so the commissioners think that we should introduce a curb?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I think we can recommend that, or we can modify any approval to include a curb. I just want to say one thing, that I know that areaways are common in the Upper East Side, but it did give me a little pause when there wasn't historically an area, when then you put an areaway. Still, it seems that in this particular case, the block supports it because there are several of them. So given its existing context, I can support this. I don't actually think the curb is absolutely necessary. It seems very simple, but if the commissioners feel that they should include a curb, then we can ask them to modify it.
Just as a historical note, I remember several times in years past when we've discouraged people from putting in gates just for the heck of it, and that it was something that earlier conversations tended to look, seemed, my recollection, to look at as like a bad trend. I'd be happy if it were to go away. It doesn't seem like there is a natural barrier. I think that the comments in seeking to put in a curb are trying to make it feel more natural, like there was an areaway that was filled in, kind of creating a fictive history for it, creating a reason for having an areaway other than just wanting to have a little front yard. But I think you're right that it'd probably be better if it were not there.
Okay, so why don't we recommend that they introduce a curb, and they can work with staff to make it sort of historically appropriate in its size, scale, and material. Kim?
Yes. In the matter of 126 73rd Street, Upper East Side Historic District, application is to legalize the installation of an areaway gate and fence without landmarks preservation permits. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Upper East Side Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the installation of the areaway gate and fence did not eliminate or conceal any significant architectural features of the building or site, that the placement, material, finish, and height of the fence aligning with the nearby stoop and areaway fencing is typical of similar installations found throughout the streetscape and at other buildings of this type and age within the historic district, that the simple fence design does not detract from the significant architectural features of the facade and is consistent with the similar wrought iron fence designs found in the district, that the work has not diminished the special architectural and historic character of the building or the Upper East Side Historic District. However, I recommend that the fence be reset on a low concrete stone curb and the applicant work with staff on the design of the curb.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? This application's approved. You were okay.
You're with it.
Okay, the next item is, this is actually public meeting agenda we're moving on to. This is the first item. This is 113 Congress Street, located within the Cobble Hill Historic District, docket number 194081. This is an Italian 8-style row house built in 1862. The application is to construct rooftop and rear yard additions, replace windows, and install Juliet balconies and an areaway railing.
Thank you. Just give it.
Good morning, Commissioners. Egbert Stolk, Preservation Staff, and I present to you an application for 113 Congress Street, located between Hicks Street and Henry Street in the Cobble Hill Historic District. Right in the edge. The application is to construct a rooftop and rear yard addition, excavation work at the rear areaway, replace windows and install Juliet balconies at the parlor floor, install new railings at the front areaway and stoop, and alter the front areaway. The rear yard addition will not be visible due to the construction of a 5-story apartment building at the adjacent block and lot, north of it, which is currently ongoing. The visibility of the rooftop addition will mostly be blocked by the new apartment building and will only be visible over the primary facade west of the building on Congress Street, Hicks Street, and Columbia Street. Commissioners, please note that the application will also include minor excavation work at the front airway without underpinning. Aaron Ruley, the consultant of the project, will present the application on behalf of the owner.
So this was read into the record, so I just want to make a motion to open the proceeding.
Good morning, Commissioners. Erin Ruley from Higgins Quaysmark Preservation Consultants for the project. I'm joined today by Cheriko King. He's the architect of record, and the owner, Peter Poulikakos. As Egbert said, this building is on the north side of Congress Street between Henry and Hicks Streets. It's right at the boundary of the historic district. This is the site of the new building under construction. There's also a new building under construction here. The existing building was previously used as the Long Island College Hospital payroll office, and it was acquired as part of the redevelopment of Long Island College Hospital, and the owner, Peter Poulikakos, bought it from the developers. So this is not associated with the Litch project at all. The house is being converted into a 2-family home for Peter and his father. Peter's young family will live on the upper floors, and Harry, his father, will live downstairs. They have a long history as stewards of landmark buildings. They are restaurateurs in Lower Manhattan and have restored India House, half of Stone Street, and Pier A as part of their work.
Thank you.
The existing building was constructed in 1862. Here it is on the left in the 1940s tax photo. And then a slightly later photograph showing the row of two is 1862, two Italianate buildings. You can see here it has lintels, molded lintels, arched window heads, and a wreath pattern Italianate railing at the stoop end areaway. The original windows were 4/4 wood windows. Here's the existing condition. We have, as part of this application, an extensive facade restoration that will be approved at staff level, including rebuilding the molded lintels, replacing the existing 1/1 aluminum windows with 4/4 wood windows. The brownstone stoop and base has been coated and is in deteriorated condition, so that'll all be repaired and restored, and new appropriate doors at the areaway. The existing surround is original, and that will be restored. Also, at the cornice, there are some ornamental details that have been stripped and also be part of the restoration. Here's the rear elevation. This has an existing two-story extension that is in very poor structural condition, is currently braced. This is the barricade for the new construction going on. Here's the upper portion of the facade with the original dentiled cornice, and then a detail of the existing extension. Here's the overall proposal, and so there is a rooftop addition that is set back 11 feet from the front facade, and there's a rooftop railing that's set back an additional 16 feet from the front of the addition. The restored cornice below, new 4/4 wood windows with an arched window head at the second and third floors, and new doors at the entryway. The brick and brownstone will all be repaired and restored as necessary. At the stoop and areaway, a new Italianate railing, replicated Italianate railing with the wreath pattern is proposed there. At the parlor floor, we're proposing new Italianate style guardrails at the window, and to change the window operation to casement windows. Here are the existing windows, the non-historic 1/1, and then a detail from the tax photo that show the historic windows. They were 4/4 wood double-hung windows with a thick center muntin, and that's a fairly typical condition in Italianate buildings with that, where it was a casement-like window. They were meant to recall casement windows of the earlier period. And so we see that throughout the district in other Italianate buildings with the thick center muntin, and that will be replicated on the upper floors. Here at the parlor floor, we're actually going to change the operation to a casement and try to keep the profiles as close to the upper floors as possible. Also typical of Italianate buildings in the district are the guardrails at the parlor floor. Here are two examples of many in the district where you have an Italianate guardrail that is recalling the same motif as the areaway and stoop railings.
Guardrails that you proposed, are they projecting or they are flush?
They're flush. They're within the reveal, yeah.
Okay.
And as a note here, the adjacent building that is the other twin in the row has been altered. The window opening is actually shortened and infilled with bricks. So by introducing the new window operation and the new guardrail, it doesn't create a disconnect between the larger row. And then here's the proposal, the existing window on the left and the proposed window on the right. The goal is to simulate the 4/4 window configuration, but just simply change the operation. And then the low guardrail below. At the areaway, the non-historic railing that replaced the original railing, and that will be part of the restoration. There is non-historic concrete paving that'll be replaced with new bluestone paving. Here's the entry into the basement and the existing hatch condition. Proposal for the areaway includes expanding the landing and the stair to create a more accessible entry for Mr. Poulakakos, and repaving all of both the upper surface and the lower surface with bluestone.
And the area of excavation is shown in the hatched area. In section, you can see it here, it extends 4 feet from the face of the building and is 2 feet deep. This area of excavation is actually based on accommodating a lift in the future if that were to be necessary. And then this kind of excavation is typical in the district. This is an example on the block of recently completed work where the landing of the basement is expanded and the new stairs installed. Similar conditions elsewhere in the district. This example extends along the full frontage of the facade there, and then other depressed entries. At the rear facade, as Egbert said, there's new construction going on. It'll render the entire rear facade and the rooftop non-visible from the public way. And here's the new rear yard extension, which extends 3 feet 10 inches additionally into the rear yard. There's a new rear stair and balcony, and the enlarged opening on the second floor. The window openings at the uppermost floor are maintained as is the cornice, and then the rooftop addition is set back from the main facade. You can see here, this is the there is a 1-story section at the rear of the new 5-story building, and that directly abuts the entire lot line of this existing building. And you can see it in the block plan here. This is 113. The rooftop addition is shown in plan, and you can see the existing rear yard extension and the additional 3'10" that will be added. It abuts the new construction, 1-story new construction of this 5-story building, and it's the first in the row. So really the only place that that minor incursion into the donut will be visible will be right at this adjacency. This is the other new building under construction. It's a series of 4- and 5-story row houses, all outside the district. Here is the roof of the existing extension and the rear yard with the construction site to the left. This is a view showing all of the existing rear yard extensions in the block front, and this is looking northeast across the block, showing the new construction underway here. This is earlier this summer prior to, well, there are 2 stories built of this building, and the foundation is about to be poured in that site. In section, you can see the excavation at the front areaway. The setback of the new addition is 11 feet, then 16 feet of setback for the new railing. The railing is not visible from the front facade, over the front facade, and then the 3-foot extension at the rear wall back here. This is the original, the existing rear wall, and this is the proposed new rear wall. The mock-up as constructed, this is the addition, and this is the railing on the rooftop. This is the front of the building is to the left. And then in terms of visibility, directly in front of the building, there is no visibility over the front facade. You can see here, this is the altered window condition of the neighboring building. And then view 2 is slightly to the east, and there's no visibility. Moving to the west along Congress Street, still within the historic district, there is, here is the mock-up and a zoom in of the mock-up, and then a rendered view. You can see that the corner, the west side of the addition pops up in the context of this stepped parapet. And here it is rendered. You can see it's going to be a sort of mottled gray finish that should go away against the skyline.
Is that the volume of the addition? It's not the railing above that?
No, it's the volume of the addition.
Okay.
There's the railing is not visible. And then moving a bit farther to the west, again, you see it pop up in a similar condition in the context of this stepped parapet, and then the rendered view, which is actually looking over through where a portion of this cornice has been removed. The upper portion of that cornice is missing and sort of affords a sight line over the building. And then moving outside the district, so Hicks Street is divided by the BQE, and so once we cross the BQE and get out onto the other side of Hicks Street, we get a seasonal view looking east. And this is now seen in the context of all other rooftop construction, which includes another stepped parapet. There's another stepped parapet in the distance, and chimneys and the buildings behind. Similarly, moving to the south on Hicks Street, you can get a glimpse through the tree, again, a seasonal view of the addition. This shows sightlines from the park, Van Voorhees Park, which is sort of wedged in between the BQE. And the ghosted area is the area of the new building on Hicks and Amity Street. And so it will block all visibility of the addition and the railing from the back. Similarly, from...
Is that the building that they're pouring the foundations?
Yes.
Okay.
And here, this is the 5-story building. This is Amity Street and Hicks. The addition and railing are visible here, but as you can see, once the building goes up, there will be no visibility whatsoever. And then along Amity, looking southwest, this is the boundary of the historic district right here. This building is in the district. This is the new construction, and we're sort of embedded in these trees back here, so no visibility from the north. And then just as a bit of context, there are no rooftop additions on the block front that 113 belongs to, but immediately across the street is 118 Congress, which is a redevelopment project a couple of years ago by Morris Ajmi, and this is a new building here, but four restored row houses, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of visibility of the 1-story addition here and here from the west, and so a small amount of visibility over row houses is not unprecedented in the district.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Michael.
Will you, Aaron, clarify for me, on page 2, the railing at the stoop is cast iron,
Cast iron.
and the references in these drawings are all wrought iron. There's a completely different...
It's going to be cast iron.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's a mistake.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I just have a question about the rear. What is the height of it's 1-story and basement that you are extruding out, right? Do you know what the height is from grade?
The height from grade is, let's see, it's on this section, 24 feet here.
24 feet to the top of the parapet?
To the top, it's to the top of the railing. So the parapet includes 3'6" or
Okay.
above what was the original condition in order to create, the floor level is the same, but they're building up the parapet just to, instead of doing 3'6" railing, it's a combination of parapet and railing.
Okay, do you know by any chance what the height of the adjacent building, the new building that's going to have a 1-story that comes up against that? Do you know?
That's 10 feet. That's shown in the elevation on 11. So you can, this is 22 feet above grade is the area to the top of our wall. And this new addition is actually, I think it's 10 feet above grade, but I think, and this is grade, so it ends up being
13 feet or so.
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the top of that 1-story extension, and this building is set back. You can see here, they
yeah.
have rear yard there, and that's how it abuts.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? All right, we'll take testimony. Christabel Guth.
Christabel Goff for the Society for the Architecture of the City. Although relatively shallow, this addition breaks an intact line of rear walls in a garden core that within the district has seen little modernization. It would be highly desirable to find another solution, preferably an interior design solution, to the space problem that is driving this really small rear yard expansion in this case. Thank you.
Patrick Waldo.
Patrick Waldo, Historic Districts Council. HDC has reviewed this application, and our committee has no objection to the proposed front facade work. The proposed rear yard addition, however, is unacceptable for the pristine block it would impose itself on. This entire block of Congress Street features a completely intact set of rear yard two-story T-porches. The addition the applicant is proposing would break that line and disrupt this rare stretch of undisturbed porches in the Cobble Hill Historic District. Additionally, the proposed rooftop addition is clunky and requires further study. Its awkward design and amateurish window configuration presents a language that is inconsistent with this district. Finally, the materiality of the addition is inappropriate. Copper or lead-coated copper or zinc are all materials which are approved in this district on a regular basis. Stucco is not. There is ample precedent in this district for how to build a sensitive rooftop addition. We encourage the applicant to explore these options. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Nora Rollinson.
Thank you very much. I'm Nora Rollinson. I live in 125 Congress Street, which is just a few houses down from the proposed changes. First, I want to thank the Commission and the Chairman for the amazing work you have to do trying to balance the needs of the city for development along with the needs of the city for a decent place to live. A procedural question. Maribel Figueroa sent in objections to this. I thought they were to be read into the record. The things that I have to say are in relation to what she has said.
Right. Her letter's not going to be read into the record. I'm just going to note for the record that we've received a letter from her.
Okay, so how does this commission know what she said?
Because they provided...
They've read it.
They provided a portal and the commissioners have access to all the emails that are sent.
Okay, so I'm here in support of her letter, which points out many things, including that Community Board 6 has not had the opportunity to review this particular plan. They reviewed the first one and unanimously rejected both the rooftop and the extensions, but the redone plan was supposed to be brought before Community Board 6 and was not. So Community Board 6 has not been able to weigh in on this. In addition to the points that Maribel made about this expanding into the donut and raising the height of buildings in the area, I would like to point out that we need to think of this in terms of the context of all the development that is going on in the area, which has been pointed out. The 50-story apartment building, which will be right contingent on this, the residence, the Long Island College Hospital residence, which is on Amity Street, which was torn down and is now being rebuilt, has expanded greatly into what would be considered the donut of this particular block. So the block is really becoming encroached upon, and the rear extension will create a much smaller backyard area. The upper rooftop addition will further block light. The sun comes in the afternoon over where that rooftop addition will be. I just imagine this horrible, tiny little backyard this house is going to have, which will essentially be fit for nothing but moss, mosquitoes. So I object to both the top and the rooftop addition and the back addition. However,
I'm sorry, your time is up. If you could just...
we welcome the renovation that this vacant house will be renovated.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Any more speakers? Are you here to speak? Yes, please come forward and just state your name for the record.
My name is Eileen Shannon. I represent my family that owns 111 Congress Street, which is the building next door to 113. I urge the Landmark Preservation Commission to reject the application for the certificate of appropriateness for 113 Congress Street for the partial floor setback, rooftop addition, and two-story rear yard extension with deck. Community Board 6, the Cobble Hill Association, and my neighbors have spent a good deal of time and energy, Marabella especially, detailing the reasons the COFA application should be rejected. I wish to add just a few words about the big picture and the Landmarks Preservation Commission's obligations. The Commission is charged with protecting historic districts and landmarks of our city. The owners of 113 Congress Street, being fully aware of the building is in a historic district, and no doubt it had added to the building's desirability for their own home. The views from 113 will be of a neighborhood in compliance with the rules of the Cobble Hill Historic District. Therefore, it is unfair to the neighboring community to have the views, our views, be of a non-complying, inappropriate rooftop and garden addition to 113 Congress Street. And I do wish to stress the burden of construction that has been going in and around Congress Street. And my dad's backyard is 15 feet deep, and it will be surrounded by brick wall and a brick wall, and basically it will be a light shaft. Thank you.
Are there any more speakers on this item? All right, so we received Community Board 2's recommendation, which is a denial. They found that the rooftop addition is visible from the street, exceeds height limitations, the parlor floor windows, French doors, and transoms are not contextual to the historic district. The rear yard extension elements, including the wing walls and Juliet balconies, was found to be too intrusive into the backyard donut, and the proposed fenestration on the second parlor and garden levels were not in keeping with the typical alignments. We also received a letter in opposition from Cobble Hill Association, as well as a letter from Senator Squadron, Congresswoman Velasquez, Comptroller Scott Stringer, Assembly Member Joanne Simon, and Councilmember Brad Lander. It's one letter signed by all of them in opposition. And we also received a letter from a neighbor, which is the letter that was referred to by a few of our people who spoke, which is Maribel Figueredo, who also spoke in opposition. Ola, would you like to respond?
First of all, the community board presentation was presented to the community board earlier this year, and the scope of the project has not changed at all. It's really just the format of the presentation in response to the issues that were raised at the community board. So the
project was not modified after getting community board comments. Okay.
And so let me just get to the block plan. I wouldn't characterize these as T-porches, and the existing condition is that this 113 and 115 were a row, constructed as a row. The other buildings were separate from that. This is a 3-foot, 10-inch extension into the donut, which maintains an approximately 37-foot rear yard. So the idea that this is going to be some cramped, mean space is somewhat offensive. And you can see the break here. These two buildings do not have rear yard extensions. The condition differs. If you look at a Sanborn map, it shows extensions, but the existing condition is not there. So this minor extension into the donut is really very minimal and will barely be perceptible from the adjacent building. I think a lot of this, the testimony has reflected, there is a lot of development going on in the area. The Litch holdings, the redevelopment of the Litch buildings, the neighborhood is under siege. I understand it. You can't walk on the streets. It's all happening outside of the district, but there are two very large development projects happening on the block. So I think, unfortunately, this project is being seen in the light of those projects. And I think that that's unfortunate because this is something that the commission sees all the time and isn't extreme and is coupled with a very good amount of restoration at the front facade.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any questions? All right, in that case, we can close the hearing. Oh, yes, actually, before we close the hearing, Aaron, can you just speak to the issue of chimneys? And have you explored whether, are there any working chimneys on your building or adjacent buildings, and does that get affected by the rooftop addition?
There are, the building on, the subject building, there's not going to be working chimneys.
Okay.
And let me get to the rooftop, the mock-up view. So I believe these chimneys on the east side are chimneys, right? Is that accurate, Jericho? And so it's these, but they will not be functioning. So these will not need to be extended. You know, honestly, I don't know what the answer is for the adjacent chimneys on the west side of the building.
Okay.
We're happy to figure that out properly.
Okay. All right. If no other questions, we can close the hearing. All right. Comments? Yes.
I think it's a relatively intact row of additions in the back, and my general feeling is that the reconstructed addition should match the footprint of the additions of the rest of the row.
All right. Other comments? Yes, Diana.
I'm going to come down a little on the other side. Normally, I would very much think that. In this case, one, I don't, if they were really T-porches, which they aren't, as far as I can see, at least the ones illustrated, really don't retain the character of the T-porch. So it's a question of allowing an extension beyond that in order, I don't know how easy it would be to put in an elevator, which I understand the need for in some buildings. And it's also next to a larger building, so I actually could approve this extension, which is not very much, into a fairly big yard. That's normally I'd feel differently, but I think this situation is somewhat different, so I'm more sympathetic to that.
All right. Other comments? Other comments? Yeah, Mike.
I mean,
Michael and then John. Okay.
To throw a middle position in, I think that the reading of the continuous backyard is kind of important, and I think you would get that if you allowed the addition to extend on the basement level, but not on the first floor. So you had like a small porch beyond, a 3 or 4 foot porch beyond the back wall of the first floor, which would allow the first floor to be contiguous with its adjacent neighbors, but the basement could have the extra couple of feet, be below the fence line. I'd be okay with that as a compromise.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
I was just
sorry,
going to
John,
comment on.
please
I was just going to comment on the front view. It seems to me that that a minor tweak would eliminate the visibility of the rooftop addition from the front, and because normally that is something that we would not permit, and it seems like it's just a little bit of a tweak, moving it slightly back to fix that.
Okay.
I agree with that also.
Okay.
I do too.
Yes, Jeannie.
Sorry, I agree with that as well, but I also feel that there are, this is a substantial row of backyard additions that align, and I think it should be pulled back to be consistent.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. I just want to say a few things. First of all, I think the renovation of at the front is wonderful, and I think it's very sensitively done. I didn't quite understand the community board's concerns regarding the restoration, but I think that's completely appropriate and nicely done. So I want to commend you on that. I think the rooftop addition, I would agree. I think it should be tweaked and just setback. I don't even think it's that much, but and you could work with staff to minimize that. I'm kind of on the fence regarding the rear yard. I think it's very modest, and I think that because it's an end condition and it's, even though it may be sort of a more intact row, I think it probably extending by 3 feet 10 inches. I don't think is going to create havoc within the rear yard context at all. And it's adjacent to, it's kind of a transition to another building which is outside the district. So I could generally support that, but given that I think several of the commissioners have commented on that, I actually think that, I think Commissioner Goldblum's suggestion is sort of interesting, which is at the lower level, you can extend it. So it gives them more space at the basement level, but not at the first floor. So it'll in fact be lower than the adjacent one-story building, which obviously, the one-story rear addition, which extends over the entire lot line. So that could be a compromise. I don't know if the other commissioners would support that. Any thoughts about that issue? Yes, Kim? So if you look at the section, because probably that's the best way to look at it. It really just means that portion over here, which is lower than the line. So it's kind of a similar approach to where we've had buildings in a row, that you've had a common sort of, I guess at the rooftop there is a line. So in that case, it won't be disturbed. It'll just be at the lower level. Other commissioners? Are there commissioners who will not support that? I'm sorry? Okay, so I understand you dissent, but other commissioners okay with that? Okay, so why don't we ask them to make two modifications. One is to set back the rooftop addition from the front so that it minimizes the visibility. The second is at the rear to set back the first floor parlor level back so that it can match where it is the existing footprint. That's what was suggested, right? And I just want them to explore the issue of the chimney. So right now we're seeing something where the chimney is not extending. And I think if for whatever reasons that chimney has to be extended and it's beyond the scope that has to, that can be done at staff level, will have to come back to us. So I just want to alert you all to that. Okay.
Regarding 113 Congress Street in the Cobble Hill Historic District, the application is to construct rooftop and rear yard additions, replace windows, and install Juliet balconies and an areaway railing. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Cobble Hill Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the proposed work will not damage or eliminate any significant architectural features, that the proposed French doors at the parlor level will match with the historic windows in terms of configuration, materials, and finish. The casement operation of the windows and the presence of Juliet balconies will be in keeping with the parlor floor windows found in other buildings in this age, type, and style. That the design, gauge, materials, and finish of the proposed ironwork will be in keeping with the Italianate style of the building, and that the height of the fence is consistent with fencing on other buildings in the row. That the excavation work at the front areaway will be minor and will not damage any significant architectural features. That a lowered and reconfigured front areaway is in keeping with the varied condition of areaways in the historic district. That the proposed rear yard addition will not be visible from a public thoroughfare. That the rooftop addition is only partially and obliquely visible from the northeast at Congress Street, Hicks Street, and Columbia Street to the west. That the height of the rear addition will not exceed the height of other rear yard additions at the block. That due to its location at the end of a block abutting a new large building under construction, a slight projection of the proposed rear addition beyond the adjacent additions will not diminish the block's central green space. That the materials of the proposed brick rear yard addition and stucco rooftop addition will harmonize with the existing materials palette of the building. That the work will maintain the scale and character of the building as an individual row house. However, I recommend that the rooftop addition be pulled back from the front facade or sloped to reduce the visibility from the street from the west, and that the rear yard addition be rebuilt on on its first floor to align with its adjacent neighbor and with the row.
My second, all in favor? Any opposed? This application is approved. Okay.
Okay. Okay, Commissioners, second item on the public meeting agenda is an application for certificate of appropriateness of Borough of Brooklyn, docket number 183352. This is 118 Amity Street, located within the Cobble Hill Historic District. It's a French Renaissance-style nurses' residence building designed by William C. Howe and built in 1902. The application is to legalize the installation of a curb cut and work at the side yard without Landmarks Preservation Commission permits and to modify a gate. This was last presented October 25th, 2016, and no action was taken at that time. 2, 3, 5, 6.
Good morning, Commissioners. The proposal before you at the public hearing and public meeting of October 25th, 2016. I'm just getting to a photo page, excuse me. This is good. The Commission reviewed a proposal for legalizing a curb cut at the Amity Street sidewalk and non-compliant changes at the eastern side court, as well as for modifying a non-historic metal fence and gate at the side court to include vehicular gates. Following the public hearing and public meeting, staff confirmed that previously alterations at the side court were approved in a staff-level permit issued in conjunction with a certificate of appropriateness for the installation of steel gates at the side court, among other work. Therefore, the legalization of current conditions at the side court will be reviewed at staff level, and that legalization is no longer included in the proposal for commission review. At the public meeting, the Commission asked the applicant to return with additional justification for the appropriateness of the sidewalk curb cut in this historic district. The applicant has revised the proposal to include additional photographs of curb cuts in the district with a key plan. I'll go through that right now. Again, the existing conditions. Yes.
Just clarify, so what's before us? It's the curb cut, because they were, yes.
Yes, and the modifications to the gate to include 2 4-foot wide gates for a vehicular entry.
Okay.
So this is the existing gate and fence. The pedestrian portion would be moved to the side, and 2 4-foot gates would be put in here. The sidewalk would be redone with bluestone colored tinted sidewalk paving.
Okay, but I'm just looking at this picture, the
Yes.
existing gate below, and so there's only one entrance door.
Right now, there is.
Right, but they're proposing, so it's not a legalization, they're proposing 2 doors?
They're proposing to modify the gate
They're
and legalize the curb cut.
Okay, so legalize the curb cut,
I'll
because the
show
curb
you a
cut's
plan.
already there.
Yeah. So this is the plan. So the curb cut is already there. They're proposing to legalize that and to replace the concrete paving to be consistent in color. And then here is the proposed gate. The previous, this is the slide you saw previously, except with the insertion of the current proposed versus the previous proposed plan. So this now would be an alteration of the existing iron fence, or maybe it's steel.
So the existing iron fence has a single door, which is...
Right, which is here the
Right,
existing
but so
condition.
so the single door, that's not, that's legal.
This is the existing legal condition at the fence.
Right, and that's what is built today?
Yes.
Okay, but as a part of the curb cut, which they put in, which was illegal,
Correct.
they're changing the fence to allow for the parking of cars within the rear.
That is the proposal,
Okay.
correct.
Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. Okay, Catherine, go ahead. You were going to show us the additional work that they had done. We had raised the issue of curb cuts, and so we asked them to go and survey the historic district and see whether there are other examples and of both parking and curb cuts.
Yes, so
Okay.
they did add that information.
Okay, you saw this slide last time about their block and the existence of curb cuts on their block. What they've added now is a key plan of the district with photographs of other curb cuts at surrounding places in the district for your reference. So that's been added.
Okay.
That was just it. So here is the proposal in elevation with regard to the fence.
Okay, are there any questions? Any questions, or commissioners are clear as to what the application is before us now? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. All right. Comments? Comments? Okay, so no comments. So let me just say a couple of things that I think, I know for me, it was, it gave me some pause, the idea of having a curb cut. And there are different situations within the district. Very often you have a curb cut, but then you have a garage. And this is sort of not quite that, because it's a parking pad that will at least be visible. So it's an interesting thing, because we don't see that much, but I believe the photographs they've shown us bears out that it may be appropriate. And for me, it's because we see some sort of wrought iron or fences which have parking behind. They're typically associated with institutional buildings. And the interesting thing about this proposal is that it's a part of parking for an adjacent building, which used to be institutional. So its shape and form still reads as an institutional building, although it's been converted to residential. So I think I could support it here because of this combination of factors. I think in a different situation, if there was a new building being constructed and they wanted to have parking at the side yard, I think I'd have to see whether it's appropriate under those conditions. So my point is that I think I could support it here, given that it's adjacent to historically an institutional building. And even though the landscaping within the court is at staff level, I'm encouraged that they're putting landscaping at the front that would also help to diminish the presence of parking behind the fence. Did any of the commissioners have other comments? Okay. Michael? Thank you.
In the matter of 118 Amity Street in the Cobble Hill Historic District, an application to legalize the installation of a curb cut and work at the side yard without Landmarks Preservation Commission permits, and to modify a gate. I recommend approval, finding that the presence of the curb cut at the sidewalk adjacent to the building's east side court is in keeping with those installed historically at sidewalks adjacent to other side courts and rear yards on this block and in this historic district. That the dark gray tinted concrete sidewalk paving and curbing will blend visually with the adjacent sidewalks and curbing in terms of material, color, scoring pattern, and result in a uniform sidewalk treatment. That the proposed modifications to the previously approved modern metal fence and gate will not significantly alter its appearance or transparent character, and will therefore maintain the historic open view into this block through the side court. And the proposed work will not diminish the special architectural or historic character of the building, the site, or the Cobble Hill Historic District.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? This application's approved.
Okay, Commissioners, the third item on the agenda is an application for Certificate of Appropriateness, Borough of Manhattan, docket number 19-09729. This is 540 and 544 Hudson Street, located within the Greenwich Village Historic District. It's a utilitarian-style gasoline filling station, an open lot, and a garage building extensively remodeled in 1934 to 36. The application is to demolish the buildings and construct a new building. This was read into the record on July 18th, 2017. Is being presented today for the first time.
them just a second to get the model. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Leanne Pollock, Preservation Staff. This item is 540 and 544 Hudson Street, located at the northeast corner of Hudson Street and Charles Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. The proposal is to demolish both of the existing buildings, a garage located here and a garage building also located there, and construct a new 6-story brick building with ground floor, storefront infill, a visible setback rooftop penthouse, and rooftop mechanical equipment. The proposal also includes the installation of a fixed metal canopy over the residential entrance at Charles Street. Members of the project team are here to give the full presentation. Thank you.
So this was read into the record, so I'm going to make a motion to open the hearing.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Elise Quays-Barth from Higgins Quays-Barth. Leanne, thank you for the very good introduction. I think I'll just start right in with the description of the site. It is at the northeast corner of Hudson and Charles in the Greenwich Village Historic District. And you can see the red mark right here, so it's in the West Village. The site is actually 2 lots that will be combined. There are 2 buildings. One is this garage, or rather gas station building constructed in 1959 with a parking lot now surrounded by a cyclone fence. And this building, which was changed many times over the years and is more or less what it looked like in 1935 with some alterations and a few things now missing. Sorry, one other thing. To note that this building has had a sidewalk shed in front of it for many, many years, and this big piece right here was an addition that was added in 1980 and approved by the Landmarks Commission. So, 540 Hudson, these are the existing conditions. This is the gas station building that was constructed in 1959, and it was not the first gas station on the site, but a later addition. And you'll see as we go through the historical information that it has not been used as an active gas station for a very long time and has been mostly used for parking. 544 is the auto repair shop. This is a photo on the left-hand side from what it looked like in 2008. There was a permit issued for reconstruction, repair, and restoration of the materials of the facade and other aspects of the building. That work was started but not finished, so the sidewalk bridge has been up for a very long time. This is what the condition is today, and some details of the base. As a case for the removal of these 2 buildings, the garage and this auto repair shop, is that they are not characteristic of the district. They're not the building types for which Greenwich Village was designated. They're not noteworthy examples of their type. And the designation report is highly critical of both buildings. I won't quote the designation report to you at this point, but to summarize, it basically says that both were lost opportunities and examples of poor planning. To go through the history a little bit, the historic maps just show that there was change over time. By 1927, on the lower left, we see that there's a gas station there, and by 1985, it shows parking. It also illustrates that the corner site here has a very acute corner angle, which is something that the new building takes advantage of in a very interesting and artful way that works with other buildings in the historic district. And it also has a kind of, the site has a kind of eccentric shape to it on the north side. So a little bit of history, historical photographs. On the left-hand side, we have a photograph from 1932. It's the earliest photo we have of the site. It shows the 1927 garage, or rather gas station building right there in the corner. This is a blow-up of the 544 building as it appeared at that time. There's a record from the Department of Buildings in terms of changes made to the interior of the building, not so much said about the exterior, but this is what it looked like in 1935. You can see that it's 2 stories. It has a pent roof at the top, and over the ground floor has some shop windows and 4 windows on the second floor. Mostly it was used as a billboard for the gas station. The photos on the right were from 1940, same gas station, but you see that the facade of 544, again, that's a blow-up of this photo. In 1935, the DOB indicates that the building was very significantly rehabilitated. Although it was an alt, they describe in detail the structure being replaced, the floors being lifted, and the facade being completely redone, as you can see in the comparison between these 2 photos. It's now a 3-story, or it was in 1940, 3-story building with a 2-story portion. You can see here vaguely there's a 2-story portion here, and then behind the billboard is a 1-story extension that goes all the way to the back of the site. The 1940s tax photos illustrate that a little bit more in terms of the details of what this building looked like. Again, it was not very it didn't contribute very much architecturally to the district, and it looked pretty much that way in 1969. This is a Green Book photo from the designation period, which shows the 2-story section, or 2.5 really, at the front of the building, and the 1-story extension. This 1980s tax photo shows the 1980 upper floor extension, which was actually a 2nd floor and a 3rd floor. And these 1980s photos are really the first photos, the only photos that we have or were able to find of that 1959 gas station building, but we have the DOB records for that construction. I think we stated that the designation report doesn't think highly of these buildings, and we agreed that to replace them with something that actually can make a contribution to the streetscape and the texture of the district is a benefit to the historic district. So to look at the immediate context, this is our site here, the map. This building was built in 1998 pursuant to a landmarks approval. It's directly across Charles Street from our site, and it replaced a garage building that had been there. This is taken from the roof of our building, and it shows there's a penthouse, occupied penthouse on the top there. These buildings are the tenement buildings directly to the east of our site, which are on Charles Street. And this 1850s building is directly to the north of our site on Hudson Street. This building is actually owned by the same owner, and it's being rehabilitated and restored pursuant to staff level approval. We're working with staff to do the restoration there. This building is on the diagonal corner from us, 1950s apartment building, and then we have this wonderful federal building and other smaller buildings down Hudson Street on the opposite corner. To consider the design of the new building, the team looked at other multiple dwellings in the neighborhood for design inspiration. And we looked at, this is just a sampling of corner tenements and apartment buildings that are located in the West Village, some of them in close proximity, very close proximity to our site. They have significant footprints and street presence. Many of the apartment buildings are 6 stories in height. And brick is clearly the prevalent building material. We have 1930s apartment building over on the lower left. This is a 1980s building that was approved on Hudson Street, just down the street. And then turn of the century tenements and apartments. The architectural expression for each of these is very much of its time. Some of them we might like better than others, but they each express something from their period. They have cornices or they don't have cornices. They have corbelling or they don't have corbelling. They have ornamentation or they have less ornamentation. The architects of each period designed buildings that were not replicative of each other, but rather differentiated and various. They're recognizable as their building types, but architecturally they make different kinds of statements, which is what makes Greenwich Village interesting. We also note that many buildings in the district exhibit curvilinear facades or undulating facades. Some have oriels, some have projecting bays, some have rounded corners. I will point out that the upper right is in Weehawken, not in the Greenwich Village district. That slipped in, but it makes the point, along with these others, that at the turn of the century, many mixed-use or residential buildings employed an undulating surface, and when they were on the corners, they took advantage of it, which is what we're trying to do today, to present a curved corner and an undulating facade. So this is our existing site today, and this is our proposal, and you have a model over there on the table, which once Morris has gone through the description of the building, we would invite you to come and take a look at it. So without mimicking any specific building, MA introduces a new design that is of reasonable scale for the district. It's 6 stories, like many of the larger or smaller apartment buildings. It uses the predominant building material, which is red brick, and it makes a curvilinear feature that we see in many of the multiple dwellings in this district a contemporary design feature. 6-story brick building plus a setback penthouse, stores at the base, apartments above, the residential entrance on Charles Street. The design concept and details were inspired by the rich texture of the district residential buildings, including a graceful undulating facade that terminates with a distinctive cornice, and the window enframements that dramatize the relationship between regularity and activity in the facade. So there's kind of an integral ornamentation to it, which I think you'll see best in the 3-dimensional models. Finally, a word about the penthouse. Staff was concerned about its visibility, but we think that you'll see from the rendered views that its impact is not so big, and it's within the range of the types of penthouses on new buildings that LPC has seen in the historic district. And I think that view actually comes rather later in the program. So with that, unless there are any questions for me, I'd like to hand this over to Morris Ajmi to describe in detail the proposal.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you, Elise. Morris Ajmi, architect. We looked at the neighborhood and we tried to distill characteristics of both the rows of townhouses as well as the larger apartment and tenement buildings. And we've reduced a lot of the detailing on the building, or simplified the detailing, but I want to go through some of the detail because I think there is enough detail on the building to relate to the surrounding neighboring buildings and other buildings in the district. And I think one of the things that's really key to the project is the subtle undulation, 3 undulating bays on Hudson and 2 on Charles, and then these pronounced window frames which will cast shadows and play with that undulation with the light of the during the day. One other note I'd like to speak a little bit about is the fact that this is a passive house, so we have a limited number of allowable windows, but that enabled us to really reduce the amount of mechanical equipment and push it back, so there's no mechanical equipment on top of the penthouse. That's all on the roof, set back, and the only additional bulkhead is for the stair and the elevators, which I'll show you later. Here's a view looking south on Hudson. Here you can see the base of the building, the center section with the windows, and then the undulations terminating in the cornice, which protrudes 3 feet from the building. This is a view looking west on Charles. You can see which I'll show you on the details, but the rusticated brick base, which picks up on a lot of the rustication that you see on some of these tenement and larger apartment buildings. Then there's the center section, which is all brick, but you see the undulations. The frame on the window, which has a chamfered profile, protrudes about 3 inches, depending on where it is on the facade, with the window set back to the frame about 6. So you have about 10 inches total from the outside face of the frame to the surface of the glass on there. Here's a view rendered elevation on Hudson, and I really like the way that this captures the light, and I think it relates to a lot of the images that Hopper drew of the village and sort of captures that essence. There's a particular drawing, smaller building, early Sunday morning, and I kind of felt this related to that painting. This is a similar view on Charles Street. I think you can really get a sense of the rustication. There's a cornice line here that's concave and built up corbelled, whereas the brick on the cornice follows that smooth curve, which is similar to what's happening on the main facade. Here's the building in the streetscape. It's approximately the same size as the building, a couple of feet taller than the building to the south. It's about 20 feet taller than the townhouse adjacent to it, and about 4 feet taller than the apartment building on Charles Street. The penthouses are set back 10 feet from Hudson, 15 from Charles back, and about 9 feet on the east side. So this is the stair and the elevator bulkhead that I mentioned. There's only a small maintenance handrail there. The rest of the roof is not accessible on the top of the penthouse.
Excuse me, can you please speak up a little more loudly?
Sorry. So here are some of the details. This is the entrance, the residential entrance. There's retail, residential, and there's some community facility on the ground floor. This is the entrance on the east side of the building. Here you can see the rustications I mentioned. This is that concave cornice here with the corbelled brick, and this is an emergency exit or egress. And here's a community facility entrance, which is adjacent to that. And this is a typical storefront. We've done a master plan showing a couple of these on Hudson, but the main entrance and hopefully the entire retail space would be accessed from the corner, which we have a curved entrance and curved glass feature at the corner of Hudson and Charles.
Does the curved glass go over throughout the building?
It's just at the ground floor. The other windows are straight, set in. The passive house requires triple glazing, and so those are difficult to do in the curve, so we just went with a straight glass there. And here's the detail of the cornice. I have a...
Yes, we're not hearing you back here. Pull the microphone closer.
Okay,
Sorry.
please don't yell from the audience. Yes.
I'll try and speak a little louder.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Here's a detail of the cornice. I have another detail which I'll show you in a second, which I mentioned protrudes 3 feet from the face of the building, and here's the glass that we talked about, showing on a typical floor. Here's a detail of the cornice construction, showing those dimensions that I mentioned. So it's about 6 inches to the frame and 3 inches that protrudes with that chamfer detail on the frame as well, which you can see in plan.
Speak up, please.
Okay. Here's a drawing that shows the way that the undulating facade works at the ground floor, or actually starting on the second floor. It's straight, and that's both on Hudson as well as on Charles. And at the top floor, it is recessed 20 inches at that point. So the outermost points are still in line with the base, but those undulations are recessed 20 inches, which you can see on the model. Here, and here. And then we did a number of view studies, which we'll show here. There's a key plan in the lower right, and the view studies show an existing drawing on the left and the proposed building on the right, and the site is indicated with a red arrow in both cases. In the key plan, this is the first image, is one which is from West 10th Street, looking northeast to the building which is here, and you can see that there's some visibility, but minimally visible penthouse here. The next view is walking north, taken midway between West 10th and Charles, and that is the existing condition, and there's the proposed, showing the visibility there. Moving to the corner of Charles, catty corner to the site, looking at the building. Here's the lack of visibility at that point. And then we move past that to north of that, between Charles and Perry, looking back at the site. We recessed the penthouse from the side so that you wouldn't have any visibility there from this position. And then 5 is from Perry on the west side of the street, looking south, and there's the building with the penthouse, which you can see beyond. I should also probably note that the cornice is the handrail for that terrace level there, so there's no additional handrail above that. And then this is a view looking west from Charles, and there's the building, so you don't have any visibility at that point. And then 7 is looking east from Greenwich, and you can see a little bit of the penthouse peeking out at that point. And then moving back east between Greenwich and Hudson, there's the penthouse. And we've rendered that in a light zinc-colored material, so it blends a little bit more with the sky. And I'm going to advance this one more slide, but I will mention that on the table we have the materials, the red brick with the matching mortar, the gray material for the window frames and windows, the glass, and there's a detail model showing the cornice and the window enfranements. Yeah, let's do that. Elise had a couple more comments, or one more comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The staff asked us to illustrate this image regarding new buildings with visible penthouses. On the right-hand side, there are two on 6th Avenue, but this one in particular shows the seventh-story penthouse set back, but highly visible for the building. The one in the middle is the building that's directly across the street from us. And the one on the end is certainly predates the Landmarks Commission, but we thought it was interesting because even though it's a much bigger building, it too has a setback that is part of its historical nature, the one on the far left. And there are other examples, but I thought this was probably sufficient. And while these examples show penthouses that are of brick, because our design for the facades here is so distinctive, we felt that if we went for a brick penthouse, that it would interfere with the read of the very special cornice. So just add that for the record. And yes.
Okay.
Oh yes, if you have any questions, we do have the floor plans and other details of that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the design team? All right, we have a lot of speakers, so why don't we take testimony, and then I'm sure the commissioner will have may have other questions for the team. The first speaker is Patrice Comerford, speaking for Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and Councilmember Johnson. Speak to the microphone.
Hi, I'm going to give testimony here today. My name is Pat Comerford, and I came to speak on behalf, can you hear me? Sorry. Of Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and New York City Council Member Corey Johnson. We would like to thank the Landmarks Preservation Committee for holding this public hearing today and for giving New Yorkers the opportunity to testify on a site of great importance to the West Village neighborhood. 538-544 Hudson Street is located on a highly important and visible intersection of the Greenwich Village Historic District. Any structure that is built on this corner will have a significant impact on the look and feel of this special neighborhood. We have no objection to the LPC approving a new building at this site to replace the vacant gasoline filling station and garage building. However, we believe the design before the commission today is in need of improvement. We believe that there is a need for a more horizontal and vertical articulation to break up the monotony of the design and to relate this new structure to the adjacent buildings. The metal-clad penthouse is out of place for this neighborhood and further exacerbates the height of the new structure, which, while seen at other buildings of similar massing in the neighborhood, is particularly jarring to this corner where there is relatively no height for decades. In addition, the ground floor lacks detail and distinction. The proposed design does not fit in the West Village, and we hope that the LPC will ask the applicant to thoroughly rethink this application. When walking the streets of the West Village, one is consumed by a sense of history that few other places enjoy. We have a responsibility to safeguard these treasures for New Yorkers of today and for future generations. Hudson Street, former home of James Jacobs, is one of these treasures, and it deserves better. We hope to see a revised design brought to the community board. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the commissioner and the commission for giving each item its due consideration and for listening to our concerns today. The LPC is in charge of a formidable mission, and we commend the dedication of its members under the leadership of Chair Srinivasan. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Charles Anderson, speaking on behalf of Assemblymember Deborah Glick and State Senator Brad Hoylman.
Good morning. My name is Charles Anderson. I'll be reading testimony on behalf of Assemblymember Deborah J. Glick and State Senator Brad Hoylman. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today regarding 540 to 544 Hudson Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District of Manhattan. This proposal, like many that have come before the Landmarks Preservation Commission recently, presumes to change buildings within the Greenwich Village Historic Districts that are out-of-scale structures that presume to use non-historic or out-of-the-ordinary design elements, such as large towers, or in this case, a waving and undulating facade. This application runs counter to the objectives of neighborhood preservation and historical preservation with grave impacts to the community. The mass and bulk of this building is too large for its presence along Hudson Street, and on this corner lot, it falls out of context with its adjoining buildings. It simply overpowers the block and rises far above the other authentically historic buildings located nearby. The ratio of windows to the facade is not congruent with other similarly styled structures or the buildings that the applicant references in their presentation. In fact, the stretch of Hudson Street in the West Village has a number of positive examples which the architect could draw upon, notably at the corner of Hudson and Charles, where a parking garage was tastefully redone in a style that respected the character of the neighborhood. While the building does include a cornice, its large nature and seamless design with the rest of the building are so strikingly different from the use of cornices and other buildings within the historic district. Overall, the facade includes a number of elements that are not congruent with other multifamily residential buildings with ground floor retail, and this one is overly repetitive. The proposal that has been submitted is far too modern, and while it superficially draws on the elements present in the historic district, it does not adequately blend with the surrounding structures or complement the objectives originally outlined in the Greenwich Village Historic District designation. For these reasons, we have significant reservations about this proposal and support Community Board 2 Landmarks Committee resolution that was passed this month. Historic districts have been designated to preserve the character and the Greenwich Village Historic District, and that includes smaller row and town homes. We strongly urge the Landmarks Preservation Commission to deny this proposal and uphold a true commitment to neighborhood preservation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andrew Berman.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Andrew Berman, testifying on behalf of the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation in opposition to the proposed design for 538-544 Hudson Street. A proposed new building in the Greenwich Village Historic District, especially one of this size and at this prominent location, warrants the highest level of scrutiny. We find the proposed design deficient in several key respects and urge that it be substantially rethought. The proposed building feels imposing and monotonous, actually even larger than its 6 stories with a penthouse. We believe that it should undergo a redesign which changes that perception and that the size of the building should be reduced considerably. To help deal with this sense of unrelieved mass and monotony, we think the building should be visually broken up both horizontally and vertically. There also needs to be greater articulation and depth to the facade. The smooth, undulating surface, punctuated by dozens of identical projecting window frames, does not provide the level of depth and variation such a building needs. Instead, the projecting frames add to the sense of monotony of the design and seem gimmicky and inharmonious at this location. The ground floor is also lacking in detail or distinction and would benefit from the addition of an element like an awning or variations in depth. Given the length of the Hudson Street frontage of this building, this is especially important. We also find the metal-clad penthouse especially jarring and out of place and believe it should be eliminated. While we applaud the inclusion of a cornice in the proposed design and the use of brick, we nevertheless believe that this design has a long way to go before it could be deemed appropriate for this corner of the Greenwich Village Historic District. Hudson Street is the main street of the West Village. Jane Jacobs' former house is less than a block north of here. Hudson Street embodies the spirit and character of the West Village in its low scale, charm, and sense of ease. Any additions to the street should share that character. The proposed design unfortunately does not, and we feel strongly should be sent back for considerable revision and reconsideration. Thank you. I'd also note that about 150 of our members have sent in letters to the LPC expressing similar sentiments. Thank you.
Thank you. If the audience can please hold their applause. The next speaker is Christopher Duff.
Christabel Goff for the Society for the Architecture of the City. Not long before the original buildings of Hudson Street in the village were built, Thomas Jefferson was refining his plans for the University of Virginia, including the famous serpentine brick walls in the academic village. So theoretically, a serpentine brick wall would be something that could be considered here. There is one problem, though. Jefferson's wall was 6 feet high, and this building, forgetting for the moment the penthouse mechanicals, at 67 feet is 10 times taller in a place that was designated for its diminutive Federal and Greek Revival houses. The problem of scale in the neighborhood is not limited to the vertical. Horizontally, there is no facade of this unbroken length nearby. Looking at the 7 comparable later 6-story apartment houses supplied as examples, 5 are broken up by deep reveals. There is no unbroken expanse as long as this one. Further, in 6 cases, there is some elegant variation, not the monotonous repetition of stark identical windows. The bulk problem is magnified by the rote repetition of storefronts at the base, the flat, featureless sign band, waiting for its Chase Bank and Duane Reade like any other investment tower on any avenue in Manhattan. A smaller, better detailed version of this undulating design was approved for another village site in 2008 by the same architect. Remaining unbuilt, it could provide certain design alternatives which could be useful. We oppose the demolition of 544 Hudson and its amalgamation into this behemoth. In 1867, this site was subdivided into 7 units. By 1899, it was 6, and in 1927, 2, as is still the case. Earlier this year, LPC approved a design by Leroy Street Studio Architecture for Stephen A. Cohen, which divided a large site at 145 Perry Street into a compound of 2 apparent buildings. Some similar strategy for mitigating the disruption of the streetscape needs to be found here. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Patrick Waldo.
Patrick Waldo, Historic Districts Council. At the risk of sounding facetious, the Historic Districts Council would like to briefly address the creeping disappearance of gasoline fueling stations throughout our historic districts. As an unloved but necessary part of the urban fabric, they are neglected but critical portions of the historic record of our city. As Robert Moses reshaped the city for our car, the car has reshaped our historic environment, and there is historic reasoning behind preserving these reminders of the horseless carriages which transformed human life. If demolition is favored, however, we feel the applicant can do better than the current proposed design, which our committee finds to be too big, too bulky, and overall seemingly swollen. Along this block of Hudson Street, there is a strong horizontal line at street level, creating an effect of storefronts that are quite readable. The plinth upon which the building sits should be much stronger so that this line can be maintained in a more overt and strong way. The brick piers coming down to grade level do no favors for this situation. Instead, they make the building look like it is sitting on stilts. A more glaring problem is the sheer bulk of the proposed design, which makes the building appear overscaled and incongruous with its surrounding neighbors. A favorable solution would involve reducing the overall building height by 1 floor. Perhaps the applicant can explore dividing the facade so that it doesn't read as one giant mass and instead relates to the smaller buildings next to it and on the rest of the block. Ultimately, this proposal looks like a compelling idea on paper, but will be overwhelming and overscaled when built. With a few changes, this could be a handsome addition to the Greenwich Village Historic District. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Zach Weinstein.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Zach Weinstein, co-chair of the Greenwich Village Community Task Force. This is actually a potentially promising proposal. Clearly, there's going to be a new building constructed on the site, but we have some significant objections to the application as it currently stands. First of all, as a number of people have already said, the bulk is all wrong. It is out of character with the surrounding historic district. It creates an odd verticality to this building. The proportions are all off. We would strongly urge that the street wall be reduced by 1 story so that it bears some relationship to the historic buildings on either side and to the entire surrounding historic block. Second of all, as a number of people have already said, there is the lack of detailing and lack of relief on the facade is problematic. I personally find the curvature interesting. I think that could go somewhere. The cornice, it's excellent that there's a cornice, but the lack of detailing and relief on that cornice and on the facade really does need to be addressed. And additionally, there needs to be some acknowledgement of the traditional street lot widths that are typical of the village and of Hudson Street. Lastly, I'd just like to point out that there is evidence that 544 Hudson Street dates back to the mid-1850s and that there is significant historic fabric remaining of that building underneath several layers of more recent facade materials. If in fact this is the case, and I would urge LPC staff to investigate this, then 544 Hudson Street really should be preserved and not demolished. We cannot afford to lose structures dating back to the mid-1850s from the historic district. Thank you very much for your consideration. I think with some work, and particularly with the reduction in street wall height, this could be a successful building. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is David Puchkoff.
Hi, I live a block away on Greenwich between Charles and Perry. There are many aspects of the proposed construction that I believe are inappropriate and out of context with the Federalist neighborhood of the West Village, such as the distracting billowing facade, the wavy cornice with no capitals, the too many identical and too close together windows looking more like a loft in Soho than a residence in the West Village. It is apparent that the main purpose of the wavy, oscillating, billowing, heaving facade is to distract us from the overwhelming bulk of the proposed street wall and the out-of-context facade, which shows the owner's complete disregard for the adjacent nearby building heights. All of these elements are directly in opposition with the core features of the Federalist style, which, as you know, sets the tone of the West Village. Modest scale, restrained ornaments, windows with lintels and sills, alternating brickwork. None of these appear in the proposal. But the most looming feature is the overbearing street wall, which should be lowered to keep it in scale with the neighborhood structures. It is possible to reduce the height from 6 to 5 stories in a manner which will not lower the interior square footage, the number of units, nor the sales and rental income of the project. I understand that the interior design is no interest to the Landmarks Preservation Committee, but it appears that the street wall can be lowered without any loss to the financial interests of the owner, while at the same time making it more harmonious and respectful to its immediate neighbors, which should be everyone's primary objective. Right now, there are 5 residential floors and 5 units and 1 penthouse for a total of 26 units, with a large interior courtyard whose light and air only serve the 3-bedroom most northern unit. None of the other units can even see the courtyard. By relocating the interior hallway and the elevator and stairs further inside the courtyard, the north unit will still receive the required light and air. There would then be 6 units at 4 floors and 1 penthouse for 25 apartments. The owner will have built a building that will have the same square footage to either rent or sell, but its size would be more in keeping with the context of the nearby buildings and would be less expensive to build. We all know that the mission and the obligation of the Landmarks Preservation Commission is to ensure that new and renovated buildings are built in harmony to the existing surroundings of the West Village. No one wants to duplicate the 19th century, but neither do we want a postmodern frivolous structure that overwhelms and stands out completely disrespectful to the neighborhood. Please deny the request of the owner to resize the street wall so it will be more of a fit to the West Village neighborhood and the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Phil Rivlin.
Thanks for the opportunity to say some words about this construction. First and foremost, problem I have is the overwhelming scale of the structure. And as I was walking on Grove Street yesterday, looking west, above the trees in the facades was the archive building that I thought there was quite a few similarities with the feel and facade construction, and not so much details, but materials. The difference, of course, is just the overwhelming scale of the new project. Archive building is set aside by itself, surrounded by 4 streets in the further west village, a couple of blocks away. And so simply, the way I see it, and I live at 115 Charles, I've been there 26 years, which is literally one building in from the corner. And this is on an adjacent corner of Charles Street, is just the mass of it in regards to what it's going to be built up against. So those are my objections. Plus, I think on the plans, I mean, it may be hard to ascertain at this point, but the ground floor looks like one large space with not numerous entrances and exits, and it might, looks like it might be a big box type of business that would want to be in that space. And the neighborhood desperately needs goods and services. That's been declining for years, and it doesn't seem to me that ground floor space is even considered in that regard to help the neighborhood out in that way. And that's basically it. So I thank you for your time, and we'll see if we can have some revisions here that might be a little kinder to the neighborhood. So, thanks.
Thank you. The next speaker is Augustine Hope. Is Augustine Hope here? Oh. Thanks.
I just was hoping everybody would have a copy.
Okay, if you can start.
Okay, my name is Augustine Hope. I own the building 543 Hudson Street, directly across the street. I've been a West Village resident for 25 years. I want to talk just to one issue specifically, which is an existing building on the lot 621-4. And I'd just like to note that this lot 621-4, which was created back in January 1933, was literally wiped off the New York tax map just a couple of weeks ago, and you'll see that in my deck. 544 Hudson Street is a classic example of a 2-story, one-family tradesman's house that is part of the historic character of the village. These buildings were ubiquitous and are now vanishingly rare. And as the Greenwich Village Historic District Designation Report says, a sash maker's workshop, a medical dispensary, a grocery, a dry goods shop, and dozens of other structures are today as much a part of the architectural and historical heritage of the village as are its many fine townhouses. From these buildings, New York's industry was jump-started in the 1700s and 1800s. And 544 is very old. The photos that you've seen date it back to the 1930s. Since the lady who made the presentation failed to quote from the designation report, maybe I should do so. It mentions only the windows and says at no extra cost, the windows at the second floor could have been related to the much-needed big doors below. At very little cost, this problem with this building could be fixed. I'll point out also that the city records for this, it was an old building in 1932. The city records date it back to at least the 1890s. We show an alteration report from 1890. And the maps, when you pull up the Paris maps in the library, you find out that it was built precisely between 1852 and 1857 on a very odd-shaped lot that was created and auctioned off on January the 21st, 1833. This is one of the original buildings in the West Village. I'd also like to point out that under the 3 layers of cladding, a layer of faux brick, a layer of faux stone, and a layer of faux brownstone stucco, you can see a lot of the original brick of the original building. And you can see how it was apparently cut into to support a new I-beam back in 1934. There is a lot of the building still under there. And just to touch on the recent history, William Gottlieb bought it in 1984 and he let it fall into utter disrepair. There was a permit taken out in 2009 that allowed for reconstruction of existing brick parapet and existing stucco. The parapet was demolished, but it's never been rebuilt, and not one repair has been undertaken on this building. We believe it's the LPC's job to protect this building, and I would like to point out also on my last page that the facade of a building across the street from 544, which is 541 Hudson Street, was completely rebuilt in 1959, and therefore, if 544 can be demolished and replaced with a 7-story building, then surely this one can as well.
I'm sorry, your time is up, so...
I have 20 more seconds. I'm going to be living with this building for another 30
I understand
years.
that, but you've already gone beyond your 3 minutes.
I'll waive mine. I'm on the list. I'll have to waive for Hudson. I agree.
Okay, somebody, all right, just go ahead in 10 seconds.
Then I want to speak as a building owner here who 2 years ago went through meticulously renovating my facade at some cost. I worked for months with landmarks to get the windows right, to get the profile of the lintels right, and even to get the color of the mortar right. And I'm just wondering why the Gottliebs are not being held to the same standard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I just want to remind everybody that you're given 3 minutes, and please try and keep within that. And we don't usually have the system of people ceding their time, so please try and speak within 3 minutes. The next speaker is Margaret Collin Diaz.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Colin-Dees. I live at 366 West 11th Street, and I've owned my apartment for 30 years. I agree with all of my friends back here that this building is not congruent with the nature of the village. The windows are far too close together compared to its neighborings. It's too bulky, it's too tall. It takes up so much more space than we are used to having there. I agree with the recommendation of the Greenwich Village Society for Historical Preservation and the CB2 to deny this plan for our beautiful Greenwich Village. The skyline is destroyed by the height of this building. It does not match with the others. It doesn't match across the street. It only matches with the Rite Aid disaster, which has already been discussed as a benefit to the neighborhood, which it is not. So the undulating architecture, while it might be appropriate to other areas in New York, it's not appropriate, in my opinion, to Greenwich Village because bay windows are what makes this facade undulate. I completely appreciate this opportunity to talk to you, and I request that this plan be denied, and I ask that the village be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Stephen Thaler.
My name is Stephen Thaler. I'm a member of the West Village Residents Association. I am also an owner at 545 Hudson Street, directly across from 544 Hudson Street, since way back, 84. Since 1984, 545, and I'd like to direct my attention to that particular building because the intent of the owner is to demolish it. And in my opinion, that should not be an acceptable option to the owner. As an owner myself of a historic building, I have engaged in extensive work with Landmarks Preservation Committee based upon their objectives, their rules, and their regulations, so forth and so on. And I'm a neighbor of Mr. Augustin, who just spoke. We have put money in, we have put time in, because we love the area, we love the historic nature of the area, and what the building that is now before the board destroys that hope, that plan, what the Preservation Historic Landmarks Committee was intended to preserve. And if we look at the picture of this building, and they should have had a linear picture going from north to south, because you look at the mass of that building, which everybody has been talking about, it takes up more than half of the block. And it obstructs the light, and it takes away from the historic nature of the other buildings. And as a fact, I understand they have a financial interest in building what they can, but so do I, and so do other people who have historic properties. We have financial interests. And I submit that putting a building up like that next to the building that I own is a detriment to my financial interest and to the financial interest of other people who own and occupy historic residences. And so I submit that that plan submitted by the architect here and Gottlieb should be substantially modified to comply and conform to the historic nature of the area. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Catherine Quinn.
Hello, my name is Catherine Quinn. I also, with Mr. Thaler, am an owner of a building across the street from this proposal. We are also members of the West Village Association, who has prepared this presentation. Mr. Hope has mentioned, so I won't spend any more time with the fact that we believe that the smaller building that is, there's a request to demolish it, is actually quite historic, and that there is no need to demolish it. On the third page of our presentation, you can see what our current skyline looks like, and once again, as and you look on the fourth page, Mr. Thaler's point, I think, is very well taken. This takes up more than half of the block. So when you're looking at the view of Hudson Street from the west side, this construction would completely dwarf the existing historic buildings. We believe that the building, the small building that is on Hudson Street that they're requesting to demolish is of historic significance and should be preserved. There are a number of ways this could be done. Also, I won't go, we object to the nature of the window detail, how tightly they are set off. We also object to the oversized cornice, which has been pitched as a benefit. We find it large and overblown. We think that there are some solutions, such as first of all, of course, we concur with Mr. Berman and others that it would be much more appropriate to reduce this structure by at least 1 story and to step down gradually to meet its neighbors. This could be accommodated if the garage, what is referred to as the garage building, were to be renovated and restored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Bill Bowman.
Good morning. Thank you for holding this hearing this morning. I serve on the board of the Charles Street Association. I speak as an individual today, even though most of the members of my board are in opposition to this proposal as it was presented here today. We have one of the most active block associations in the West Village. We pride ourselves as having one of the most beautiful streets in the entire city. The Charles Street Association sponsors many events each year, including the annual spring planting, where we plant the 93 tree beds that line Charles Street from Greenwich Avenue to West Street. I've served as chair of the Green Team, the planting committee, for 18 years. I've lived in the adjacent building to this proposal, 103 Charles Street, since 1981. The views from the rooftop of my buildings will be cut off by the building and the penthouse if it's completed as designed. I speak in opposition to this proposal. First, I totally agree with most of what has been said by my neighbors and various associations that have spoken already. This building is way oversized to most all of the other buildings in the area. It is not characteristic of the neighborhood, and it is not a reasonable size. It is a monolithic structure of an imposing nature. The pitch of the upper floors makes it even more imposing. The proposed design is a wall of brick and glass. There is no greenery visible from the street. While the building might be suited along West Street, it's certainly not suitable for the heart of the village at Hudson and Charles Streets. Whether the last buildings completed, 150 Charles Street on West Street and Charles, is an innovative design with several green terraces facing Charles Street. We are also concerned about the huge amount of retail space. It will add approximately 20%, even though I haven't done a full calculation, more retail to our blocks. Most all of the buildings on Charles Street are 4 to 5 story brownstone buildings. Several of these brownstones have gardens and window boxes. We have one of the oldest synagogues on Charles Street. Our brownstones are beautiful, a source of tranquility for the residents of the neighborhood. People come to the West Village from all over the world to experience this beauty. No one would travel even 1 mile to see this new building. This proposal needs a drastically rethought concept. It would be a monster in a neighborhood of gentility. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Stephanie Cummings.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Cummings. I live at 525 Hudson Street, and I live in a building that dates back to 1889. And this building, as you could see, it's does not belong in this beautiful, historic West Village. It's an eyesore to me. It's too big. Everyone had said this before. I oppose I'm so nervous. proposed plans for 544 Hudson Street for many reasons. One is the massive street wall that overwhelms the block, as you could see. And it is larger than 80% of all the 4 front stores or the buildings on the block. I don't know how you can't see how abusive and just, it's just too big and it's too bulky in the windows and everything that everyone else said. I highly oppose it. I couldn't see this from my building from 1889. Looking at this, there's nothing historic about this building. It does not belong in the West Village at all. It's too big, it's too high. If you could, I mean, the whole thing is just, I don't know what to say about it. That's all I can say. Thank you so much. I oppose this building.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rebecca Janish. And will be followed by Michelle Herman, and I think David Puchkoff has already spoken. So, followed by Michelle Herman.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Rebecca Janish, and I reside at 525 Hudson Street. And I would just like to open with a quote. In the end, the character of a civilization is encased in its structures. This is a quote by Frank Gehry. I think this quote does a beautiful job in describing exactly what could happen to the character of the West Village if this structure, as it's proposed now, would come to fruition. The character of the West Village would change dramatically, not in a positive way, but in a very negative way. I look at this building and I feel like choking. But the West Village is full of life, it's full of breath, it's full of living beings, living objects, living trees, flowers that bloom. And this building, I believe, would throw a death kiss to many of these living objects that we are lucky enough to smell and breathe and take in every day of our life. Just to end with another quote. We shape our buildings, thereafter our buildings shape us. That's a quote by Winston Churchill. I don't think I could say it any better myself. So please, I would very much like for you to take in the words of everyone who has spoken previously and all those that will speak after me, and please revise this proposal. We want something to come up, but just please let the character of the West Village remain as beautiful as it is. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jonathan Gibal, who's here on behalf of Community Board 2. I'm sorry I only found this. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Gibal. I'm a member of Community Board 2. The following resolution was adopted by our Landmarks Committee on June 15th and then adopted by the full board on June 22nd, recommending denial. The applicant asserted that the 2 existing buildings are not contributing, and neither of the buildings is in reasonable condition, and the row house building has been altered beyond any recognition of its original state. 3, the proposed residential building is 6 stories in brick with identical punched windows throughout and a rounded corner and an undulated facade that becomes more pronounced floor by floor and ends in an unanchored cornice that is designed to disregard the engineering principles of the chosen masonry material. 4, the mass and bulk of the building is unacceptable because it overpowers the surrounding historic buildings and is prominently situated on a corner lot. 5, the penthouse is too large with no apparent attempt to minimize its bulk by either selecting a cladding that would be less industrial in appearance or placing it further back from the 2 facades. It is aggressively visible as illustrated in the applicant's renderings from numerous vantage points on public thoroughfares. 6, the undulating facade and disturbingly unanchored cornice have no relationship to the examples of classic neighborhood buildings proffered by the applicant, and no scant reference to any historic period or other buildings from the district, and the applicant, when questioned, did not provide a persuasive response. 7, there is no vertical or horizontal expression and division with the windows or architectural elements of the type that is seen in almost every worthy large building in the district, and there is no attempt to suggest the roughly 20-foot lot frontages, especially with respect to the building to be demolished, that are typical of the district. 8, the repetition of the exact same size windows with a large ratio of openings to masonry, contrary to examples shown, and in almost every worthy building in the district, do not vary in size from floor to floor, have no enframement or other architectural distinction, have a mullion pattern that is without historic or district reference, and the ratio of opening to masonry give an appearance of an undistinguished institutional building. 9, this appearance is reinforced by the absence of any variation in the plane of the entrances, storefronts, and variation of the ground floor height to the upper floors and windows, as is typical in the district. 10, the overall design shows no reference or reference to the historic architecture of the district, reflected in overall size, proportions, detailing, lack of vertical and horizontal elements, and is oppressively monotonous and without distinction on this prominent Greenwich Village corner. If I may finish, I have one more. Thank you. 11, there was 10, the overall 11, there was considerable oral and written testimony from the public in opposition to the application and no support for the application. Therefore, be it resolved, Community Board 2 Manhattan recommends denial of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Michelle Herman.
Hi, I'm Michelle Herman. I don't want to add to all the arguments that have been made. I think they've been made very articulately and clearly, particularly David Pushkoff's argument about the possibility of reconfiguring the building so that the precious developer doesn't lose any income from it. I sit back here fairly often listening to what goes on. I can't really see anybody's faces when I do. I often wonder about all of you individual commissioners and what's driving the process. As commissioners on the Landmarks Preservation Commission, it seems to me your main obligation is to try at least to preserve what you can that is existing. And admittedly, this little garage building is not in great shape, and it's not the finest example of a building type, but it is a historical building, and it does seem to have some integrity behind the layers that have been added. And I just don't understand why you don't at least make a strong effort to save what does survive. I know that I'm yelling against the wind here. I know that you didn't save perfectly intact buildings nearby on Jane Street that had tremendous historical and aesthetic importance in the history of the neighborhood, but you have another chance here. You don't have to do what the developer's asking you to do. You don't have to grant everything that they want. I know there's always pressures, there's real estate pressures in any project going forward in New York City, but it seems to me that it's your job to push back a little bit. So I just urge you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jordan Shaps.
I ask your indulgence. I'm experiencing an imbalance problem in inner ear thing, so I'm very wobbly and I'm nervous. I can only reinforce everything I've heard here today. The only thing I would like to say is that we're all looking at the same pictures, but we're not all seeing the same thing. This is inflated, arrogant, self-consciously calling attention to itself. And are we going to have a row of for rent stores on the first floor? I would just like to mention that I live on Perry Street, and I'm the founder of the Perry Street Crusaders. after giving up, I left a New York magazine after 23 years. I've done 800 covers, and now I work from home, and I do books. So working from home, I make my own schedule. It's really amazing to me that at 5:30 in the afternoon, when I go to Hudson Street to cross, to maybe go to the Rite Aid or go wherever I'm going, it's rush hour, and you can walk across Hudson Street against the light. That's how quiet and contained and calm this part of the village is. That building does not reflect that quality of life. It just doesn't. The other thing I'd like to say is that I have my coffee with me. It was purchased at the Panini Cafe, which is the first floor of the building that Jane Jacobs lived in. Jane Jacobs could have gone to her window, looked to the right, and see that building. I would have to say that I am happy that she's dead, because if not, taking a look at this building would have killed her.
Thank you. The next speaker is Tom O'Keefe.
Hi, I'm Tom O'Keefe. I live at 70 Perry Street, a block and a half from here. My wife owns a small business on Horatio. We've heard great arguments from GVSHP, CB2, a number of property owners and neighbors. I'm not going to reiterate. I think it's pretty clear that the building is far too large or massive, as people have said. The design is monotonous. The penthouse is egregious. I think the point that hasn't been made, my wife was an architect in the city for 10 years before opening a small prenatal yoga studio. When she saw the design, she just kind of shook her head. The building's ugly. It's meritless. Nobody said it yet, but it's a really ugly design. I'm originally from Boise, Idaho, and this wouldn't be out of place in like a strip mall or suburban Boise, but we're in New York, we're in the West Village. You ought to have a higher standard, and we've looked on with disappointment and really dismay as GVSA, or rather as the LPC has more or less seemed to rubber stamp increasingly out-of-step designs on Jane Street in multiple locations, in the Meatpacking District, all across the East Village, really throughout the historic district. So I'll just reiterate, it's very ugly. We can do a lot better. It should be shorter. It shouldn't obstruct neighbors' views, and it should come back into step with the neighborhood. And frankly, I think there's a strong case that's been made that 544 should not be demolished at all, and that would be a step towards reducing the ugly mass of this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Angelina Howell.
Hello, my name is Angelina Howell. I live with my husband at 96 Perry Street between Bleecker and Hudson Streets, a landmarked co-op building in the West Village. I have been a member of the board of directors for our co-op for the last 3 years and have lived in the West Village for 9 years. Full-time residents, and especially owners and shareholders who live in the West Village neighborhood, have a strong value to preserve and protect the charm and sense of community that the West Village offers. As someone who lives in this neighborhood and works in New York City, I do not believe this proposal is representative of these values our community has worked hard to protect. The current proposed design of the building does not align with the architectural elements you see adjacent to this building along Charles Street, Hudson Street, and Perry Street. The design does not match with the neighborhood. The building is too tall and appears that it does not meet the standards for the Landmarks Preservation Committee. I encourage the committee to reject this proposal and ask the design firm to submit an alternative proposal, one that is more aligned with the architectural elements of our neighborhood and not as tall, with a maximum height to be the same as number 548 Hudson Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Any more speakers? Yes, please come forward. We'll give them 3 minutes. Just state your name for the record, please. In the microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I actually don't dislike this building, and if it was further north or further south than the West Village, I would actually appreciate the whimsicality, and I do like the curved corners. Having said that, I'd like to just go back to context, and if you do that, you need to go back to the first slide, the first upper corner that showed this was originally there were originally 4 buildings on this site. It was probably part of a tenement block. which is similar to my block. I live at 115 Charles, which is originally part of a tenement. And 535 Hudson across the street was three or four buildings that were combined in the 50s, which only go to 4 stories. I just wanted to say that this building doesn't really reflect this in any kind of vertical elements or breakup. It is a very large bulk, and it doesn't reflect it in any vertical or detail element found in the other reference, most of the other reference examples, say grouped windows, sills, lintels, and the more significant and detailed ground floor with the cornice, which also might allow for more individuality in these storefronts, which is very typical of the few blocks we have here. And the curvilinear design is, which I applaud the whimsicality of it, but is not the same as bay windows. The windows do include a faux panel in them. I'm not sure what the architectural term is for them, but I think the lights, which I appreciate the fact that they're not designed as flat glass panels. However, when in reflecting light, what you basically get in effect is that you've got alternating layers of glass and brick, which can be very pleasing. And in a modern contemporary setting is fine. It feels a lot like, sort of like the Parsons building on Fifth Avenue. And the Height Aid of the Rite Aid building is, which is not a lovely and successful replacement to the taxi garage, which I remember because I lived across the street. But it is anchored, the height of that building is comparable to this, but the penthouse is brick, and it's very, very difficult to see from the street. And also, it is anchored by another combination building at the south end of that block, which balances it out somewhat, which is not the case on this block where all of the smaller federal single buildings are dwarfed. I would just like to see something slightly less, something less bulky, something that reflects the similar character of the other buildings on the street, and would just request that you go back for revision on this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Okay, no more speakers. Would the design team like to respond? Yes.
There were many comments, many comments, but 2 major ideas. One of them was about the demolition of 544 Hudson Street. We have not had the opportunity to review materials that were just submitted today. We look forward to looking at them. But we look forward to reviewing them. But I would like to point out a number of issues with regard to the existing building. First, because one person chose to recite from the designation report, but not completely, this lot, which once contained both a front and back building, is now fully occupied by a 2-story garage building, which represents an extensive remodeling of 1934 to 1936. This building, like the lot next door, which is the gas station building, serves a utilitarian purpose. However, the design leaves something to be desired. At no extra cost, this is the quote from the previous speaker, the windows of the 2nd floor could have been related to the much-needed big doors below, instead of which large plate glass windows have been evenly spaced above without any relation whatsoever to that which lies below. Another example of poor planning and little or no relation to one's neighbors. The DOB record in 1935 indicates a reconstruction of the exterior and the interior for conversion to a garage and auto repair shop with a dwelling at the second floor. Plans call for removal of all interior partitions and reconstruction of brick walls with new steel members on the street facade. New windows, new steel windows to be installed on the street facade. And roof and part of the first floor are to be raised from 19 feet to 22 feet. So if you look at these images on sheet 7, between the 1930s image and the 1940s image, you see the change in the building that we're talking about. So the ground floor got higher, which means that the second floor got higher, which means that structure was changed. And the top of the building is much taller than it was in 1935. In addition to that, back to the photographs, you can see that there was ferrous material that was added into the building. These square openings are not the same openings that existed in 1935. They were increased in height. There are multiple layers of stucco over brick. The building had some fake brick stucco added to it at a certain point. If there are any remains from the middle of the 19th century, they are de minimis and they are damaged, and there is really nothing worth saving from this period. In addition, the interior structure is contemporary wood and steel. We're very happy to have the staff come back and look at the building with us, and we're also very happy to give a report to the Commission on the details of what you see today for this building. I don't think that the Commission has ever seen from the date of designation to the present day that this building contributes anything to the historic district. That's one idea. Second idea is that the proposed building is inappropriate to the district. And I think that we have to respectfully disagree with the comments made by most of the people in this room, whose comments were not always respectful. We have addressed many of the issues already that were raised. People clearly disagree with us, and that's why we're here to talk to you. But I do think that, I feel very strongly about this as a historic preservation consultant, somebody who's been working in this field for over 30 years here. I remember some of the buildings that were put up in the 1980s in Greenwich Village, and I remember people decrying the towers that were being built, 6-story apartment buildings, please. So I think that it would be worthwhile for the Commission to review our materials, review in closer detail the models, and the bigger model and the smaller one, which give you a sense of the detail that's also indicated in the drawings with the architectural details, and consider how we should proceed. I think that the building certainly is of an appropriate scale and is very similar in its mass to the building that's directly to the south. And Morris, if you'd like to address a couple of comments about the design, I think that would be good.
Hello again. Couple of things. I'm going to try and address most of the issues, and I've grouped them together. I have lived in Greenwich Village for over 30 years and have lived on 11th Street between Waverly and West 4th for over 20 years. And I walk these streets every day. I absolutely do not feel that this building or the massing is overpowering. There are dozens or scores of buildings in the neighborhood that are 6 floors or even greater. And as I went to Gourmet Garage this morning to pick up some breakfast items, I noticed there were many buildings with similar juxtapositions, low-scale buildings that were 2 or 3 stories next to buildings that were 6 stories. or 5 or 6 stories. So I think that this is absolutely typical of the village, and you can walk those blocks and you can see that occurs. On my block, there are 4 buildings that are over 6 stories, sprinkled amongst the townhouses that are on that block, and that is on 11th Street, so it's not an avenue. And I think that buildings of 6 stories are very typical on corners and on the avenues. So that, as far as the size or the scale or overpowering, I don't think that that is the case here. As far as a lack of detail, I tried to explain where that detail occurred. There is a detail at the ground floor, at the cornice level, at the bulkheads, and we paid particular attention to the cornice, did not want to do a historic cornice, so this is a detail that picks up on the undulations on the facade. And regarding the undulations on the facade, we were criticized for not having any articulation on the facade, but either horizontal or vertically. I don't agree with that, and we do have a division of the facade horizontally at the ground floor here, a strong line with a cornice there, the center section, and then the top. The vertical divisions occur by the creation of these undulating or recesses that create the undulating facade. So I think that that is not the case. And regarding the ratio of brick to glass, I think that, first of all, we did use brick and red brick, which we see throughout the district, and the ratio of brick to glass has changed over time, and I don't think that we can be expected to have buildings that mimic so closely the townhouses or other buildings in the neighborhood, but the vertical proportions of the windows we feel are consistent with the neighborhood, and I do think that there is a tremendous amount of brick, and this is not what I would consider a glass building. So for all those reasons, I don't think that this is either self-conscious or arrogant. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the commissioners have any questions for the team? Any questions? All right. If there are no questions, we can close the hearing. All right. Comments? Well, I can just say a few words, and I'm going to open it up to the commissioners. I agree with many of the people who testified regarding the importance of Hudson Street. It is the heart of the district. I go there probably a couple of times a week during the summer. They have great restaurants, very dog-friendly. But leaving aside the uses itself, its character is sort of quintessential, and it is very important to the district overall. I've been there many times, but I went recently to walk the street because I knew this application was coming, and there are a lot of issues that were put on my radar even before this hearing. We had received testimony from the community board. So I walked block by block, and it varies, and it changes. But there are things that unify blocks. There is a mix of building heights. It's very different from 7th Avenue. It's very different from 6th Avenue. It has a more intimate scale, but it does have a range of building heights. And they do range from smaller buildings to taller buildings. I just want to comment about the existing buildings on this block. I am in the opinion that actually the existing buildings can be demolished, that they're not contributing to the district, and it does open up an opportunity for a corner, which right now looks very sad, and disconnected actually with the robust nature of Hudson Street. So I think the applicant has also, for me, gone through the exercise of explaining why these buildings do not contribute, notwithstanding that the commission report also said that, and I think then they can be taken down. I don't think that's going to take away historic fabric that is critical and that contributes to the district. So there have been lots of discussion about scale, and I think that in general, Hudson Street has six-story buildings. We have six-story buildings all the way from I think, from Bedford, all the way to Jane, then it goes to, I think, beyond Jane, Bank. I walked up to Bank Street, and both sides of the street have many six-story buildings. And they're new buildings as well as buildings that are very much historic and very much of the typology that we see elsewhere in the district. So the idea of a six-story building, a street wall, is not, to me, in the abstract, not inappropriate for a corner. I think that the interesting issue of scale and design can make that six-story street wall a real unifier, or it may not be there as yet. And I feel that that's the case with this building. I think we're not there as yet. I think the idea of having an undulating surface is an interesting abstraction of different types of street walls within the district, and I think it could be really explored. But I think that somewhere the scale of this is not quite there. And I think that, when I'm looking at these street walls, and we'll go to the penthouse and my comments on the penthouse, but just the street wall overall, and if you look at the changes along Hudson Street on both sides, it seems that one of the things that they can do, which I believe would help unify this connection of what's right now a vacant site with its neighbors, is to find a better match with the building to the south of it. I think that it's not a significant move in terms of height, but I think it'll connect. How that's done design-wise, whether it means changing floor-to-floor heights, whether it means changing the number of floors, is something that I'd leave to the designers, but I think that may start bringing down the scale of the building. I think the penthouse is something that, in my opinion, besides material, I think it's better actually if it disappears, and whether you set that back further and it just feels more like rooftop bulkheads, that would be better. And then I think the other aspect I just want to sort of open up about is more about the details and verticality and repetition of this. There is something somewhat too repetitive about this, which I think can also be refined. And maybe it's the fact that you have this undulation, which is creating interest and perhaps kind of speaking to sort of the scale and sort of breaking down the scale. But I think the uniformity of the windows somehow dilutes that. And it's almost like you want in my opinion, whether the fenestration can actually speak a little bit more to that rhythm that they're trying to create. Maybe you don't have to have the same amount of masonry between every window, and that may sort of shift that and break down the scale. I think the idea of having, I guess, they're projecting windows in a box is a little bit confusing to me. I'm not sure exactly what it's trying to do. And I think the cornice is a little bit of a missed opportunity of making it perhaps really end the building somewhat differently. But, these are design aspects which I feel I should just raise and let the designers kind of think about interesting solutions. So those are my sort of general comments. But I do think that some of these moves about lowering the street wall, thinking about how to make the penthouse really go away or disappear, will scale back the building and better sit with the neighbors, and then really more about the details and articulation of the building. Yes, Michael?
Okay, thank you. I think I agree with everything you said. I think that the thing for me that makes the scale of this project so challenging is the combination of height and breadth. I mean, you've got a very, very long streetscape here, an unusually long site for the village and for the central village, where things happen in smaller increments usually. And I think that combines with, so then you say to yourself as the designer, do I pretend like I'm making 7 buildings in a row and make fake divisions and have it to, how do you treat that site with integrity as a building and be and try to reference the scale of the site at the same time? And I think that I think your suggestions are spot on. I personally think that the height should come down to align with its neighbor on Charles, and not with the gable point, but with the cornice, which would put it at around 60 feet, which could be accomplished through floor-to-floor height reductions or a floor coming out. Because I think the thing that's interesting about this 6-story building is how much taller it is than most of the other 6-story buildings in this immediate neighborhood. So I think that there's nothing wrong with 6 stories per se. I think it's these particular heights that seems to appear a bit inflated. And I think that we've seen a lot of buildings here that try to deal with this conundrum of, large, wide site referencing a smaller context by doing a few things. One of them you suggested, which was to have the window groupings start to indicate influence of that bay breakdown by clustering and spreading, so that it doesn't necessarily have to be a faux panel of 3 and then another faux panel of 3 separated by a reveal, but they can start to cluster in a way that retains the uniformity of the intent. It is a single building, it should look like a single building, but that starts to suggest the rhythm of the streetscape. Another thing that could be done that we've seen here is, we've seen it a lot, is that the windows can change their shape as they go up, so that they were perhaps denser down low, more open up above, so that you had a sense of height and proportion, where the more contextual size window happened down low and the more contemporary sized happened higher up. Another observation that I had was that I thought that the storefronts are a missed opportunity. I think that if you look at Hudson Street, what I see is that in the context, most of the storefronts on this more commercial street tend to not be of the same material as the building above. They seem to be more of a break, where there's a real line, and what happens at the streetscape happens in its own world, really. The building above doesn't infect the streetscape. Whereas if you go to Charles Street, the exact opposite happens, where you have a much stronger relationship between the building above and the streetscape below, to the extent that it's really almost, it's much more minimized. There's a lot less retail activity on Charles, and there's a lot more residential activity at the streetscape on Charles, where the windows are actually quite a bit smaller. So I think that the opportunity exists to knit this building, like you were saying, into its context by having the storefronts instead. I think a lot of people seem to have this quite legitimate fear of the box chain invading the neighborhood, and I think that we can't here control who the tenants are, but I think we can kind of set an environment for whatever retail tenant comes by having the storefronts have a little more character, have a little more specificity and relationship to the street on which they occur. And I think that would help the building's context. In terms of the penthouse, I think that there is plenty of rooftop junk in the neighborhood that is visible, and I think that this should look a little more closely at it. I personally could see the rooftop elements being more related to studio windows, or kind of the rooftop could take the opportunity to break the scale of the building down into something that's more relevant to the overall neighborhood. The bay structure there. I think there are opportunities on the roof, if it is going to be partially visible, that it should relate a little bit better to the rooftop stuff that we see in the district.
Yes, John, then Diana, go ahead.
Okay. I'll be brief. I I'll rely on the architects on the commission to make design suggestions. But I would just ask the applicant to consider a couple of things, because I think the testimony was very informative to me, and it helped me to sort of see the way the community is seeing this proposal. And there are just 3 pages that I would ask the applicant to focus on to see perhaps what we're seeing. Page 17, the question would be, why is it that we're seeing a warehouse? What is it that's about this that makes me feel like this belongs in a different district? Page 15, I think, is the question would be, why do I see, I know it's a horrible word, but why do I see monotoneity? On page 15, why do I see monotonous? And the third page is on page 14, which is, I look at that particular picture and I say, why do I feel like this is out of scale? Why is this massive? Those 3 pages sort of give me the impressions that I think the community is feeling. And so I'm not the person to give you design suggestions, but I think if you look at those 3 pages and ask yourselves those questions, it might help to sort of bring together the 2 opinions.
Thank you. Diana?
Yeah, I agree with the chair's opinion and also with Michael's. And, from the beginning, when I looked at this, and sometimes you think it's the fault of the rendering, but it isn't, in my opinion, that they have a sense that this is a really monolithic building, and it's out of scale for the location, and it's also, its presentation is just too uniform. So, looking at it at the same time, yes, they're 6-story buildings, and I don't think that's really the problem. Yes, reducing it and I would like to also agree that bringing it, into scale with the adjacent building would be good. But I think the large part of the problem, which has already been discussed, is if these were like sort of normal or other smaller buildings in the neighborhood, it would be like you had 6 of them in a row, or 5 or 6 on each side, and it's that because you're replacing these 2 other buildings, you've got just so much bulk involved. It really needs to be broken up, and I understand the architect was attempting to do that with the undulating building. Unfortunately for me, this really just doesn't work. It really just seems to me out of character. I can't, and I'm somebody who often accepts something really new, but I just don't feel in this context that it's working, that this undulating brick building is really accomplishing the purpose of breaking up this monolithic building and having it seem to really fit in and be in scale with the neighborhood. So people have, been making some good suggestions about how that could work, looking at, because when you look at other large buildings that they presented as examples, they were broken up in various ways. There are lots of ways that, and the architect knows this very well, obviously, how such a building is broken up in the district normally and seems more appropriate. So I'm not going to go. Michael's already made some suggestions. There are others one could look at. But unfortunately for me, unless the architect can come back with something and combine it with the undulating building, I'm not sure that's going to really be in character.
I just want to make one comment about the frontage, because I know a couple of you have raised it, and so I'm looking at this. It's it's 103 feet. That's what the frontage is.
Yeah.
And clearly the building across the street has a much wider frontage. Further down, actually, on Hudson, especially when you get to between Christopher and Morton, those blocks are all 6 stories, and the building footprint occupies half the frontage of the street. So there are examples over there, and I think that one of the things, because I think this is also, I think sometimes we look at these things very much in isolation as the picture, and it's hard to kind of see it in this larger context. And I think for us to even understand the scale, I think the applicants, when they come back, should think about some of those buildings that occupy larger frontages, because you're right, there is, scale is, design and scale, it's very subtle, and there are different approaches.
Yeah.
But if you're inspired by the district, and the district has so much variety, it's good to look towards them to see how they've been successful in the past. Jeannie?
I think the first thing I want to say is that, I truly, before I address any of the design and the contextual nature of the project, I do want to applaud the applicant for building a passive building. I cannot say, every time a passive building comes before us, whether it's big or small, I am thrilled. We just had one in Ditmas Park. In fact, there were a host of them in Ditmas Park. It's almost like they're incubating out there. Any building that is energy efficient and is, working to reduce the carbon footprint on this planet, I applaud. So thank you for that. And I realize that the windows play a role in that, and that's very important. And I think windows are important anyway, because when you live in a city with a lot of buildings and not a lot of street and, light and air, anything you can pull into, any light you can pull into the inside of the building, as a resident of this city, I truly appreciate. So I want to say that. I do agree with almost everything everybody is saying. I feel like if you move to page 16, I know it's so funny, just to change the perspective for just a minute. First of all, I want to say this is an incredible site. Mars, you're very lucky. You always get these wonderful sites, nice corner sites. They give you an opportunity to really do something special in the city, to have an impact on the city's landscape. And certainly we're all here working to make sure that we preserve the integrity of the city's landscape and help to engender a more beautiful and wonderful city as we move forward. I also appreciate in theory what you're trying to do here, which is design a modern building, but speak to the context and the integrity of the district. So I applaud you for that. When I look at this, and I think your materials reflect that, when I look at this side of the building, which doesn't seem quite as overwhelming because the frontage isn't quite as long, I feel like this building, maybe what you were trying to do was really, with the undulation, not only address buildings from the past, but also do something that is kind of wonderful and sculptural. I just kind of see it. There's a beautiful little wave here. The projections of the windows are kind of wonderful punctuations. I feel like there's not enough, and there's not enough of an articulation in this building, and whether it comes from the undulations and the curvature and speaking to that, or whether it's articulation in the materials, and also, creating a little more of a break in certain places. There just needs to be something more here. It's so understated. that especially as it, on the front of the building, I think that's why it reads as being monotonous, because it's just a little bit too, understated. So I would encourage you to do a little more. I think there were some very, very interesting suggestions. If there's, more of a move, maybe the window groupings would also contribute to this concept of not only further articulation, but adding to the sense of sculpture. I also do feel that I don't have a problem with 6-story buildings. I feel like there's a lot of in this area. It's in addition to the beautiful historic buildings from the past, there's a lot of very uninteresting buildings around. You have an opportunity to do a really wonderful building here. I think there does need to be a little bit more of a distinction at the street level. The storefronts could really add to the character of the community, which, a lot of people don't even look up. And so if you could address that, provide a little more attention to that, I think, people as they walk down the street could sense the connection between what's there and what you're bringing to the table. And then finally, I guess I would like to say that I think it would be great if the penthouse could be invisible. I'm not saying to get rid of it, but again, because of what I think you're trying to accomplish with this building, it almost does it a disservice. This is not a building that wants junk on top of it. It's a building that wants to, stand on its own and have integrity and really fit in, while making its own statement. So that's it.
Okay, other comments? Yes, Michael?
Minor, I think. I agree with all of my colleagues' comments. For me, the great issue is the bulk and the mass of this building, and I would hope with the diminution of the street wall, there would be some diminution of the cornice as well. It is this looming presence for me because it is, again, I don't want to use the term monotonous, but there is a monotony about that brick at that level, and the cadre of windows I do find somewhat monotonous, and so I think there can be better articulation there. I have to mention the issue of 544. I did a condition assessment of that building, I think about 12 years ago, and at that point, we pretty much told the owner of the building he ought to get all his stuff out of there. It was in really poor condition. There was certainly nothing of the earliest building, very little of the second incarnation of it left, and it was, it was a mess. And as you know, that I am the reactionary preservationist, and I wanted that client to save that building. There was very little that could be said about that building that was advocating its salvation at that point. And so I really don't have a problem with the removal of that building.
Okay. Yeah, yes, Kid?
I wanted to express my, regard to the architect, because although I do like the building, although it does seem to be somewhat out of scale, I don't think it's greatly so out of scale. It isn't like there's a lot of redesign that needs to be done, but it does have a problem with the scale and the height and some of that articulation on the street wall. And I think that could be fixed pretty easily, but otherwise, I think the design is pretty contextual in its own way. Just not matching what's there, but, you know, the idea of having something there that's kind of like the building next to it that also has a lot of street wall, but it has much more articulation. The red building has so much more articulation on it that's breaking it up. I think it's that variety of size of windows, variety of decoration, whatever that needs to be added, and it'll come down a little. And yes, the penthouse needs to get pushed back. It really does. But I think articulation would help a little more.
Yes, Dan?
I just wanted to mention on the articulation issue that I was struck by the pages 11 and 12, you know, where they're showing examples of wonderful buildings that are rounded corners or wavy facades or corner buildings, all of which are, you know, most of which anyway are nice and interesting. They do achieve that articulation. That's why I said there, you know, there's so many ways to do it, and including the windows, but the cornices, the brickwork, just, and I know the architect has great skill in doing this, so I'm sure he'll come back with something. And that's why, although I reacted negatively a bit to the wavy, I'm not sure if it came back in a different incarnation that I might find it appropriate. So I don't want to rule that out, because I do think that what he was trying to do was a good thing. It's just that I don't find it working right now. So.
Yes, Wellington?
I agree with almost just about everything between the public and what the commission has said, and I think this needs further refinement to thing. I think maybe the corners in trying to be creative makes it look even more massive than necessary. I think that because it's not capping at the top in the way that you normally have a horizontal band, and so I'm not going to play designer and leave it to the architect to come back.
Okay, yes, please, go ahead.
I do want to say, if you're, you know, as you address this, I kind of like the cornice in keeping with this idea of undulation and sculpture. I'm personally not having a problem with it. That's it.
Yes.
Just throw in a couple of other things that occurred to me. First of all, I know that one thing that seems to be a motif here is the boredom factor. It's a little bit monotonous or something. And while I don't necessarily agree with that, I think that one way that they could look at changing it, is something that Morris has done a ton of, is looking at brick texturing, brick patterning. It wouldn't violate the integrity of the design, but it would give texture, three-dimensionality, shadow to it. Also, one thing that was commented on was the window design, and I think that's an interesting point. The design employs simulated divided lights, but they kind of seem neither here nor there, right? If you look at the immediate area, you see double hungs and you see 6/6. I think that the choice of this particular design puts it kind of in a generic place, and I think that there's an opportunity there by looking at the mullion design to try to tie it into the neighborhood somehow. Just another suggestion.
Okay. All right, any other comments? All right, so we won't take any action, obviously. I think that generally, I think the commission is open to seeing something happen over here. So I think all the commissioners have commented on the fact that the site is going to be cleared in this new building. I think it seems that it really, in general, is about sort of refining the building design in a host of different ways, but to bring down the scale. And I think that, you know, I'm not going to go through all the commissioners' comments. You've heard them. And so we won't take any action today, and we'll see, look forward to seeing your next iteration. Thank you, and that's today's session. Thank you all.